All right, so really quickly, I've just made a quick selection of the face right here. Let me hide my metal one for just a second. And I'm going to go to my path palette, and right now this is listed as a work path. I'm actually going to change this, and I'll just call it profile. And when I load this thing, if I hit Command click on to load it, you can actually see that I've got the marching ants, but in this case I'm not really sure whether this is selected. It's really just bisecting this image. So I don't know if it's selecting the girl or the background, but if you take a look at the path itself, you'll see that the profile of the girl is white and the background is actually gray. So in this case, I just know the orientation of it. This is correct. So if I go to my layers palette and I simply add a layer mask to that, you can see it works the way we expected it to work. It gets rid of the background and it shows the girl. However, there are times with this path that this can actually be the opposite. Instead of this being the girl that is selected here, it is the background. And all of this has to do with the ordering of your path, of your pen tool. So I'm going to turn this mask off just so that we can see it. Back in the path part, I'm going to select the path. So I'm going to go after the direct selection path, the black arrow, and I'm going to click on it. If you then hit the pen tool, you'll actually see up in here, we never really talked about this, but there are ways that you can actually change how the path is interacting with the image itself. And so if you take a look at the options panel, there's this weird, it looks like two squares that are sort of intersecting each other. You can see my cursor is actually pointing at it right now. That's a drop-down menu, and if you do this drop-down menu, by default, Photoshop sets up the pen tool to exclude overlapping shapes. This is how you get, when we did the donut shape, when we were doing the Viacom, and we did the outside circle of the O first, and then we did the inside of it second, whatever. They actually nested correctly, and so this ends up being the way you want to see it here. There's a whole way that you can get shapes to interact with one another, and I could go through and tell you or explain to you how to do all of that. However, there's a PDF of that, and so I just want to make everybody aware of this PDF. So if you take a look in your assignment folder, actually it's in the session 4 folders, it is this PDF right here, and it's how overlapping paths intersect. If you take a look at this PDF, it will explain what that drop-down menu is that I just showed you. I'm going to show you how to use it, but this will explain what's going on. I think these are really somewhat esoteric names for how these processes work. So I don't refer to this. I just know what it is I'm ultimately looking for. So I'm going to show you that as well. So we go back into here, into Photoshop, into this path that I've got selected right now. If I go to this drop-down menu and just change it, so I'm going to go to Combine Shape, and you'll see nothing is actually changed on this pen tool. So I'm going to go to the next one, Subtract from Front Shape, and now you'll notice that this is flipped. And what's happening now is that essentially this pen tool, the path is actually going to allow me to select the background and keep it and get rid or ultimately mask out the face. So this is what this one looks like. And again, you can see the face is now in that gray, and it's the white part is the path right here. So I'm going to load that as a selection, and you'll notice I've got marching ants now that are also going around that left edge of this. So I'm going to then go back into Photoshop. I'm sorry, back into my layers palette. I'm going to get rid of the original one and delete it, and then I'm just going to apply this other one. And now you can see it's done the exact opposite of this. So there are times where you will actually see these weird white or gray colors in different spaces in your image in the path part. You don't get any other colors. You don't get, there's never going to be black in here. There's never going to be, it's just these two, because again, your path itself has no opacity to it. It's either in or out. So if you load a selection and it's not giving you what you think you should have, that's where you go up to these things and you actually say, okay, I want this to be different. So I'm going to go back to the, actually I'm going to select the path first. So again, make this active, make that active, and then again, the P key to get to the pen tool, and then come back up here. I basically just go through these. I look and say subtract front shape, well that didn't work. I'm going to come down to intersect shapes, well that one works. That I know that this is what I'm looking for here, and then I can just go on from there. Does that sort of make sense to everyone? Again, you can get really deeply in the weeds. Usually if you do your outside path first and then your successive inside paths, continue to work your inside paths, whatever, you'll have the right layer or the right ordering for it all, and you'll get the result that you're looking for. But otherwise, this is actually the way to go about doing it. However, this being said, now that I've got this, so I actually am going to get rid of that layer mask. I'm going to go through the steps that I should go through to do this. So I'm going to command click on this to load this as a selection, and this gives me a selection. Now I've told you guys that you should now at this stage of the game go up to the select menu, come down to modify, and then down to feather to just take the edge off this selection. The problem with this method is though you really can't see what does one pixel do? Is that the amount of feathering that I want in here? Maybe I need more. Maybe I need 2 pixels. I mean, so you can go through. You could apply. I could say okay to this, and then apply it as a layer mask, and then look at that edge and say, okay, well, did that work for me? Is that work for me? Is that not work for me? I'm going to bump this up. So I'm going to ask you guys to do the same. Go ahead and load your selection. We're going to feather this selection, and I'm actually going to hit it a little bit harder. I'm going to go to 2 pixels on this, and I'm going to say okay to that, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to apply it as a layer mask, and then I'm going to zip in here and just take a look at the edge and say, do I like this edge? Did this work? And when I look at this edge seems too soft to me. So to make sure that that indeed is correct, I want to see what this looks like on the new background. So I'm going to go after my metal background, so I'm just going to bring him open again. And so we had options in here. What most of you guys did, which was correct, is that you actually took the background and you brought it over to the image that has the profile on it. And that's the correct way to do it, because the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to have spent all that time building the path and then losing it, because when you build the path and then you take the image, if I was going to take this layer right here and bring this over onto my metal and let go, well, it brings it in here, but I don't have the path in this image anymore because this is the metal image. So the better move on that would be to actually take your metal image and bring it over to the profile. So let me go back in history because I didn't want a new anchor point in here. So to do that, you'll see that in this in this whole background layer thing that I've got, I have got a smart object that's actually got smart filter on it. I've got a couple of gradients on here that are controlling the tonality of this. You can put all of this into a group. So if you want to do that, so everybody bring up the metal background. If you select the top layer, hold down your shift key and select the bottom layer, you'll notice that now all 3 of these layers have been highlighted. Then go to your flyout menu in the layers panel all the way to the right side, and in that flyout you can do a new group from layers. So this will put into a group, and a group is just a folder that's going to hold all of these things. I've picked these layers. It'll bring up a dialog, and I'm just going to call this metal background or metal back. And say okay to that. And it's collapsed it all into one. So now if you click the little drop down menu, everything is still in here. I haven't changed anything. But now I can actually grab just the metal background and drag that on top of my profile. Whenever you do this, if you hold down your shift key, it will bring it in perfectly centered. It's not necessarily that it will fill your entire screen, but it will bring it in centered. So I'm going to hold down my shift key and bring it in centered. And you will see now that I can't see my profile, and that is because the metal background is on top of my profile. So I'm just going to drag my metal background, the whole group, down below, and the minute I get the blue line now on the bottom underneath it and let go, you'll actually see that the figure is now sitting on that. So if we zoom in now and take a look at this edge that I did for 2, I feel like this edge is too soft. So if we take a look at the mask, hold down your Option key and click on the layer mask, you can see it's this softness, it's the edge on here that's actually making this look soft. And it's the middle layers, the middle tones in here that are actually doing it. The black is sharp, the white is sharp, but it's these grays that are in between here. So this is the very same trick that we use when we actually do a choke or a spread for our image, right? I'm going to actually use levels to sharpen this back up. So if I made this mistake, we can actually unring that bell. We don't need to go back in time to actually undo that feathering part and to pick another value for this. So I'm going to do this. You can actually watch this happen in real time, and then I'm going to undo it, and I'll do it so you can see it happening with the image. But with the mask selected, if you hit Command-L to bring up the Levels dialog box, all we're going to do is grab the black point and drag it sort of towards the middle, but I'm also going to grab the white point and drag it towards the middle. What I'm doing is I am saying that all of those grays that are in the middle that are actually giving me that softness, I'm going to actually narrow that scope of middle grays. So I've started to push black in from the outside by pulling the shadow slider in, and then also from the white side. So if we actually use your preview to turn it on and off, you can see what it's doing to this edge, and it sharpens it up completely. You can actually drag these things all the way into the middle, and you can remove all of the sharpening. I mean, look at this. That's actually now as sharp as it ever was with just the pen tool. So this is all an option for you to see this happen in real time. Again, make sure that your layer mask is selected, Command-L to bring up the Levels dialog box, and then just start to pull in a little bit of the black and a little bit of the white. And now you can actually see the difference here, and it just sharpens it up. Again, I don't want to tack sharp again. That would defeat the whole point of it all. But this is just a way to be able to control all of this after the fact. Make sense, everyone?
Yeah, can you show real quick where's that feather part?
Where's the
feathering part?
Oh yeah, so when you go to do these things in the beginning, let me get rid of that mask, and you'll see what I mean. By the way, when I keep saying to you guys in your image, do not apply this mask, do not apply this mask, what I mean is this right here. I threw the mask away, and it says, okay, do you want to apply it, delete it, or cancel this? In my case, I want to delete this mask, but if I click on apply, you'll see that it actually gets rid of all those pixels. That is now a destructive move. I can't recover from this. This is my only copy of this image. I mean, obviously I have other, but you guys, it's just not the way to work. There's no reason to do that. The layer mask is doing exactly the same thing as getting rid of it, but the layer mask remains editable for the rest of your life. So do not do that. I'm going to hit Command-C to do that. I am going to throw this away. I'm just going to delete the mask and then go back to Path, Command-click to load this as a selection, then up to the Select menu, down to Modify, and down to Feather. And this is where you can put in that value. I put in 2 pixels there. However, I'm going to show you another way of doing this. This is how you used to have to do it until about 2 years ago when Photoshop actually added something else. So I want to just make sure everybody knows that that exists as well. So I'm going to cancel out of this. I am not going to feather this mask. I'm simply going to come onto my Layers palette, and I'm going to add it as a layer mask. And you can see it's just too sharp. It's like tack sharp in here. It looks like it's been cut out. However, if you select your mask, so I've got the brackets that are around my layer mask, and look up at your properties panel, you'll notice on your properties panel you actually have a feather control for your mask. And now you can actually come in and you can dial it in, and the advantage of this is you can see it in real time. I can see the feathering that I'm doing against this background. So in some ways this is possibly a better way of doing it because you can really sort of see what's going on here. This is how I would actually do it. But again, this didn't exist in earlier versions of Photoshop. So the feathering those selections before you added them as a layer mask is something that people have been doing forever. So anyway, I just wanted everybody to get that part of it all. However, what's not going on here is this, and this is actually something that, again, I'm going to park my metal background somewhere else. I'm going to double click on this hand. So let's say I want to actually change the scale of my profile. I want to make it smaller. So I'm going to select the entire profile, so that layer is actually selected, and I'm just going to hit Command T. That is the keyboard shortcut for transform. Again, when you do that, look immediately up at your options panel. I'm going to click on the link between width and height, so it's just that little chain link, so that when I change one of them, it changes both of them. And again, everybody knows you can add the shift key to do this as well. This is just a habit that I get into. It just makes things less confusing, so it's something that I always do. And now I can actually use the scrubby slider, so I'm just going to put my cursor over the H or the W. You'll get the scrubby slider, the hand that's got arrows that point in two different directions. I'm going to click and I'm just going to drag down to like 50%. And you'll notice that it does the width as well to 50%. That was the reason we did the whole chain lock thing. But then look what's happened to your image as well. I'm going to go ahead and accept that. Not only did it make the profile smaller, but it made your layer mask smaller as well. Both of those did it together at the same time. But look what happens if you go in and click on your path. So go to your path palette, click on it to make it visible, and you can see your path is no longer in register with the profile. And the reason it isn't is that I transformed and made the profile smaller, but the path, I didn't do that to the path. Does that sort of make sense, what's going on here? That's problematic. I've gone to all of this work. I don't want that to actually happen. So I'm going to go over to my history palette, and I'm going to go back in time to where I did that free transform. Before I actually transform this image or do anything else, I'm going to add the path to this layer as well. And the way you do it is that you select the path just to make it active. I'm not going in and getting the pen tool or any of the, I'm not using the dark arrow or the light arrow. I'm just clicking on the path itself in the path palette to actually make it active. You can see the lines on it. You'll also notice that there's this blue line that runs straight down the front of it now that was never there. I didn't actually make that part. But remember, when I did this path on the pasteboard, I had the path going well, here, I'll see if I can get back to the pasteboard. Yeah, this is what I really had going on in here. I had the path going all around here in the back, but when you're not on the pasteboard and this isn't visible, Photoshop simply brings all of this information up to the forefront. It still works. It's not like it still understands that this is what I'm trying to select. So ignore the fact that it puts this part of your pin line that goes right down the middle of this, because that's not what ultimately gets loaded. It's just the way that Photoshop ultimately deals with it. So anyway, let me go back to where I was. So make sure that this profile is active. Go back to your layers palette right now. We've already got one layer mask on here. This is a pixel layer mask. We're going to add another layer mask on here. So click on the little icon at the bottom of your layers panel that looks like a square with a circle in the middle. Again, it's just the add. And now what you'll see, if you can take a look at your layers panel, I'm going to drag mine out a little bit. We've now got two masks that are on this image. I've got one mask in the original. It's this black and white one. That is a pixel mask, meaning if you select it, you can go in with a brush and paint on it. You can, I can run filters on it. I can blur it. I can do all sorts of things on this because it's a pixel mask. But right next to it actually is the path itself. They call this a vector mask, and vector comes from the path that we're actually working with. That is actually a vector. Does that make sense to everyone what's going on here? However, now look what happens if we do a transform now. So Command T to bring up the transform dialog box, click on the link between width and height, grab the scrubby slider and drag it down to 50% and say OK. Look at what happens. Not only did it shrink my pixel image, it shrank the mask, but it also shrank the path tool. So if you actually take a look at this, I'm hovering over it, you can actually see. If we go to our path palette, you'll actually see this was the original profile up at the top that still is big and is unchanged, but this is now the profile vector mask. Now, this is a temporary vector mask. If you actually go back in here and select like the metal background, that layer will not be selected, so you will not see that path down in your path palette. But if you go back in here and you actually make this path, make that layer active and go to your path palette, you will see it. And then to keep it, because again, I'm about order in this, I don't want this just to be the vector mask. I want to have a copy of this in my path palette. Simply drag your vector mask profile down to the little square with the plus in the center. It will make a copy of it, and I would just call this profile small. Because that's what it is. Now, if we zoom in onto this image, what you will see is I'm going to turn right now all of my masks are on. I'm going to go into my path palette and click outside of this so that I don't see the path part of it at all. I don't want to see that blue line. I do want to zoom in. So if you hold down your shift key now and click on the pixel mask, again, the pixel mask is the one in the middle, the one that's got black and white only. If you hold down your shift key, you'll put a big X on that, and now you'll see that it still is being knocked out because the vector mask will actually do the work that the pixel mask is doing. The problem is that the vector mask is based on that path, and look at the line that I've got, the edge line that I've actually got on this. It's tack sharp. But another new thing that Photoshop has added just in the recent couple of versions of Photoshop is that you can now feather a vector mask. So if you click on the vector mask, again, the gray and white mask that's in the back, and look up at your properties panel, you'll notice that you've actually got a feathering up here as well. And you can actually go in and feather this guy. What's interesting is that it feathers in a different way than the pixel version does. The pixel version, when I went up to 1 pixel feather, it was not that extreme. But when I go to a 1 pixel on this vector mask, it looks like I've just smacked the shit out of this with some monster Gaussian blur tool. So they're not entirely equal in terms of what the strength of that part really is. But you can dial it down to like a 0.4, and that actually seems like a pretty good version to me. So that's where I would go with this. If you hold down your shift key again and click on the vector mask, it will actually turn it off as well. So this is how you can go in and control which of these is actually in control, what's really doing the masking, what's not doing the masking, etc. Does this make sense to everybody, what's going on here? But here's the beauty of this. So I'm going to double click on the hand to kick all the way back out. I have got my metal image, so I'm going to bring my metal image back up into Photoshop. And you remember I said the trick to this is always to move the background to the figure. You don't need to do that now. If you click on the layer that's actually got the vector mask on it, I'm going to grab this layer now and drag it onto the metal layer and hold down the shift key and let go. It will actually then bring this into my metal image, but now if you look at the path palette, you'll see that the path got brought with it. So that vector mask, the path actually exists and lives on the vector mask, and you can actually see the path is right there, and you could actually go in, make the path active, grab the direct selection tool, that's the one I'm going to go after, select your path, and you could go in and edit your path right now. I could go in and change these points, and I could re-edit this guy. So it's a way to actually not only connect your path to the image that you used it for, but it's a way that will allow you to transform your path to make it larger or smaller or any other transform that you want to do. But it'll also allow you to transport that path from one image to another instead of always having to bring your content to the image that you originated the pen tool path in. This allows you to take it anywhere with you. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Any other questions about path stuff? Okie dokie. So, I've already heard from Gabriella about tonal retouching. How did it go for the rest of you? You know, it's really funny. There's 2 camps for this, and nobody's in the camp in between. But there's only 2 camps of this, and it's people either love it or they hate it. So there's certain people who really love just I don't want to say mindless because that seems like it's such an indictment of you, so I don't mean it like that. But there's people who get serious pleasure out of just sitting there doing something over like a period of time like that, whatever. I'm not one of them. That doesn't mean that you can't find satisfaction and pleasure in, whatever it is. So, yeah. So, are you happy with the results?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's what was frustrating me, was that I didn't care that it was time consuming. I was like looking at it and I was like, I'm doing something wrong.
And
It looked better to me. I think I was like, I don't know.
okay, all right. Well, so at any rate, that's tonal retouching. What I end up finding, and I'm just going to throw this out here to you guys. Again, I still insist on doing it the way to show you, because now you know what it would really take to actually do that stuff. What I ultimately end up doing with it more than anything is the large tonal work. Because what you find that ends up happening is that there's so many ways that you can try to do other tonal work, but it ends up shifting your color. Like the healing brush tool is a classic for this, but it just ends up shifting your color, and then you start fighting all of that. And so the thing that I've found with it is that when I get into something, especially if it's really subtle or delicate, that doing a tonal retouch large allows me to make it either lighter or darker without shifting the color. And it ends up blending in much, much, much better than any of the other tools that I use. So that's one thing that I ultimately do with that. But with that being said, I don't think I'm too far ahead of my game right here. Yeah, I'm going to jump right into this. The method that I use primarily for my retouching, again, I use the tonal work when I'm doing really serious beauty stuff, especially if it's really tight. But usually my first go-to is to actually use split frequency work to do the bulk of my retouching, and then I will use tonal stuff to go in and fine-tune that if I need to do that. So, how many people in this room have ever heard of split frequency or used split frequency? How many understand it? Can you explain it to me? Right. Okay. Say what?
No, actually I can. So one is separating the tone, or working on tone, and the other one is working on texture. So you split those two, and then you start you use different tools for the texture and different for the tone.
And that's all exactly right. So what the hell has the frequency got to do with that? Yeah, it's the thing that's, because it's what everybody calls this, so it's the rub, but if you actually know, then, so we're going to start with doing split frequency work right now. However, that being said, this is like the perfect time for a break. So I've got, let's call it 2:35. If we could do a hard, be back at 2:45, 2:45, that'd be great. And then we'll jump into split frequency work. Okay, do me a favor. You should have your assignment that you're actually turning in today that was that split frequency, not split frequency, but the tonal retouching image. Do me a favor, if you will, and go ahead and open your copy of that up. I'm just going to show you a couple of tricks about working on it to do this kind of work. I'm not going to ask you to change your image at all, but you need something to work with, and if you go after that image, it'll just make it easier. I'm going to grab a copy of one of mine, I hope. Yeah, so just playing a little cleanup here to begin with. Okay, so one of the problems that people run into when they're actually doing this sort of retouching on this, I'm just going to make a quick retouching layer here, so hang on one second. Again, hold down the Option key and click on this, call this tonal retouch, Retouch, small. And again, change the blending mode to soft light. Go ahead and fill that. Say OK to that. And then zip in really quickly. I'm just going to review this really fast. I want to make my dodging and burning colors, so I'm going to select my foreground color. I'm going to sample a general color of her skin just to give me the hue value of that. Then I'm going to select brightness, my brightness radio button in my foreground color picker. I'm going to drag it up till I get somewhere in the low 90s as a percentage. That's typically where I go to. Then I'm going to click saturation, pull it down, and again, I tend to stay somewhere in the low teens for that. You don't want to go much lower or you'll lose all color in it. So that's going to be my dodging color. Then for my burning color, I'm going to do the same thing, just click roughly on the same place, grab the brightness slider, pull it down. I don't want to go all the way down to black, but I want a pretty solid dark color. I'm also going to push the saturation of this up somewhere in the sort of the mid 50s area, whatever. So these are my dodging and burning colors. I'm going to hit the B key to get my brush. I'm going to keep the blending mode of my brush as normal. I'm going to change that, make sure that it is a completely soft brush. I'm going to set my opacity to 6 and my flow to 100. I'm actually going to go to my tablet now. And I'm going to zoom in to this field of texture that's actually in here. I'm going to make my brush smaller so that I can actually get, so it's roughly about the size of the area that I want to work with in here. Now on my laptop, I don't do a lot of retouching on my laptop. Typically at this stage of the game, I would go to a second view of my image. So to do the second view of your image, up to the window, down to arrange, down to new window for Skin Eyes Retouch, and it just gives me another copy of this same image. It's another view. I've only got one file open here. So anything that I do in either one of these is going to be reflected in the other one because they are just two views of one file. So anyway, I'm going to keep that off to the side, and then I'm just going to start working on this. I'm going to zip in here just a little bit more. So my dodging color, and I'm just going to start tapping around in here, and I'm lightening that color up. I hit the X key to make it a little bit darker, to go after that color, X key again. So I'm just keeping my left hand on the X key, and I'm actually running my way around this, whatever. And then if you actually get, I'm going to close up my second view because I don't need, it's in my way right now, and I don't need it. If you get discouraged about this and like, well, I'm not doing anything, just turn your eyeball on and off and you can see that, yes, indeed, you are doing something and that it's actually working for you. Yes?
So how do we know which parts to do white, or which parts to do the lighter color and which parts to do the dark?
So when you're looking at the skin right here, what's giving it that pebbly texture are these dark areas and these lighter areas. I'm trying to get those, I don't want them to be only one color. And what's important here, and we'll get to this when we actually grade it, if you take a look at this skin right here, there's a highlight on that. I want to keep that highlight. If I get rid of the highlight, the big general highlight, this whole big general, if I get rid of that, then her face loses dimension. She just goes flat. So I need to keep the bigger, broader one. But I don't want all of this smaller, pebbly stuff in here. You can see, if you take a look at this guy right here, doesn't it seem like that these dark areas are recesses? And doesn't it seem like these sort of like other little areas are almost framing those recesses, so they're raised up. So I'm trying to get those to be more, to have less extremes between the two of them. But in the overall aggregate, I'm not trying to actually get them to all be the same color. I don't want this all to be just one color. You need to keep some variation in there or it's no longer real. So that's what I'm looking for in doing all of this. Something I didn't mention to you guys, but I will probably see when we talked about, I will probably see when I do the grading part, is these little white specks that are in her eyes right here. These little white things, remember I showed you how to get rid of those. Those have to be retouched out using a clone stamp tool or possibly healing brush tool, whatever. You can't dodge and burn those guys. However, if you remove these, you kill the girl. So what happens is if you want dead eyes, you remove all the highlights because removing the highlights in her eyes removes all the moisture. So what you're seeing, these little highlights that are in here, this is all coming from the moisture that's in her eyes. If you remove that part, then she looks like her eyes are dry, it looks like she's dead. So if that's the look you're going for, you now know how to do it. But again, and the same thing will happen on lips and on teeth as well. If you actually take a look here, these little highlights that are 2 little dots in there, they give her mouth, there's moisture on her teeth right now. If you remove those, then again, she looks dead. If you remove all of these little highlights that are on her lips, she's dead. So that's not what I'm looking to do in the lip work right here. And a lot of times in the lips, people will completely remove these little creases. I don't go after all of them because that lips have creases in them, right? And if you remove that, then it looks like she has one of those, like, you know, I'm in Halloween mode right now. It looks like they have those wax lips, right? I mean, that's what it looks like, and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't look real. So again, you need to, you know, consider that in all of the work that you're doing in here. But back to this area that we're talking about right here. What happens, and what probably happened to you guys, so I want a raise of hands. How many people did this happen to? How many people, after staring at this image hour after hour after hour, got blind to the color of the image? Right? It's horrible. It's horrible. So you all of a sudden, because what's happening is that you've got this color that's being presented to your eyes, and your eyes, the cells in your eyes, the receptors in your eyes, whatever, they oversaturate to that color, and you never go away from it. So it becomes really hard, and it can actually get to the point where shit will start inverting itself, and all of a sudden you don't know if you're supposed to be lightening this area or darkening this area. It's a nightmare, right? So there's a trick to getting away from this, and here's the trick. So, and I want everybody to do this again with me, if you will, please. We're not going to spend tons of time on this, but I do want to show you this part right here. So, I've got my small tonal retouching layer. You want to put this, so what we're going to put on here is not really a solar curve. We're going to get to solar curves in just a second, but I'm going to show you where we are going to go with this. I'm going to add an adjustment layer on top of this. I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer on top of this, and what it does is it removes the color. And so your eyes will no longer saturate on that color. However, the work that you're doing for the dodging and burning that we're doing on our tonal layer, you can still do. You can still see there's lighter areas and there's darker areas. So I'm going to go back to my tonal retouching small. And again, I'm still working with my dodging tool right here. So I'm going to just continue that work by tapping around in here, and it's actually all lifting up. Hit the X key again and actually bring this other area down slightly. X key again to actually start to lift this other part in here. Oops, that was actually, I hit the X key and it, for some reason it didn't hit it, whatever, so you've got to go back in time. Because I was ultimately started to burn an area that I was trying to actually dodge. So, and just continue to work like that. And in spite of the fact that you have this black and white layer on, you can still see that it's doing all the work that you wanted it to still do. So that won't compromise or change anything. Does that sort of make sense to everyone? Okay, I'm going to throw this black and white layer away. There's other tricks to actually doing this kind of work that will point things out for you. They're called solar curves, and I want you to make one with me right now. There is no official formula for this. I've given you a set of 10 solar curves. I'll show you how to load them in just a second, but I want to make one first so that you get some idea of what's really going on here. So to make a solar curve, again, I threw away the black and white adjustment layer. I'm just going to add a regular curve on top of this. So if everybody will just add an adjustment curve on top of this, and you'll see that there's no change that happens in here because I haven't done anything to the curve yet. But this is what I'm going to ask you to actually do. I'm going to drag my layers palette down just a little bit so that I can see. You need to be able to see your entire property of this curve part. So to do this, what I'm going to actually ask you to do, if you take a look at your curve right now, you should see a sort of a graph area in the background, and most of you should have 4 divisions. Does everybody sort of have that? Do you have any more? You can change it to get more divisions if you want. To do that, hold down your Option key and click on the auto. No, it's not the auto part. Oh, it'll be up at the very top in the Properties panel. Click on the menu drop down and come down to Curve Display Options, and we can change this. You'll see there's a little graph square, a small one, and then there's another one next to it, and if you click on that, you get a division of 10 instead of 4. You can also flip your curve so that it goes, your black will be on the right-hand side instead of on the left, which is how you would want it to be if you were editing CMYK, because again, CMYK is a subtractive system. So anyway, it's just little things like that. This will allow you to control all of that. I'm going to hit cancel out of here just so that you guys know that that existed. I'm going to grab a point that is in my 3/4 curve line, so take a look at my screen if you don't know where I'm talking about. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it up to the very top. Then I'm going to grab one in the middle, another point in the middle, and click and drag it back down. And then I'm going to click a point on the other side and drag it back up. But basically I've got this really weird sort of S-shaped curve, and you can see it does really bizarre things to my image. If you double click on the hand to kick back out, the reason they call these solar curves is that basically we have solarized this image. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, if you come in and you take a look at certain things in here, you can see it'll actually make areas easier for you to spot. So you can see, for instance, right now, the cigarette burn shows up much better on this with this solar curve than not. All of the little white dots that you actually need to get rid of are really obvious on here right now, the ones that you need to retouch using either clone stamp or healing brush tool. They show up better here. You can totally see them. How many of you guys picked up on the fact that she actually had stuff on her forehead that all needed to be retouched? You can spot it here a little bit better. So solar curves can help you do things like that. There is no rhyme or reason to what solar curve will do the job for you. So anyway, I want to show you a couple of other solar curves that will show you other things, and I'm going to show you one of them. We're going to go back to the car so that I can show you actually how it would work on that, because people use solar curves a lot when they're trying to retouch metal. But so that's basically an idea of what a solar curve is. To get rid of the solar curve, come up to your preset menu, click on the drop down. It should say custom right now. If you click on that and go all the way back up to the top to default, it'll restore your curve to basically just a straight line curve that's doing nothing on here. To load a curve that's actually been saved for you, come to the little menu that's to the side of Properties panel. So on the right hand side, again, Properties tab is showing. Come all the way over to the side, click on your drop-down menu here, and you can come down and you can actually load a curve preset. So it's the 4th option down. So load a curve preset, a dialog box will open up eventually. Go to your session 4 folder. So, I'm sorry, not 4 folder, it's going to be session, I think, 6. And inside your session 6, there's a folder called Solar Curves, and then there's another folder called Solar Curve Images. I'll show you what that is in just a second. Click on the Solar Curve folder to open it up, and you'll see you have 10 of them in there. If you just select number 1 curve, so just I picked the number 1, and you can't do multiple ones, you've got to do these one at a time, but go ahead and say OK to that. And you'll see that this is now even a stranger solar curve. If you take a look, it's got a whole lot more variations that are jumping up and down. But in this case, how many of you picked up the fact that she had problems on the bridge of her nose? You've really got to go in there and pay attention to it. If I turn this off, I don't see the problem in there. But if I turn the solar curve on, I do spot the problem in there. And so this would be something that I could use to help actually point out areas to me. I have a much better idea of the problem area on her forehead. I can see it a whole lot better. And again, you can still retouch on this. However, this is the part that gets tricky. In this case, this solar curve, it's actually inverting some of my tones. Some of the tones, like in this area right here, some of these that were actually meant to be darker have now been made lighter. Some of them, so if your curve could ultimately be inverted, and if that's the case, you need to remember what it is you're really trying to do. So if I turn off the solar curve and I look at this area in here, what I can see when I turn the curve on and off, these are areas that are actually lighter that need to be made darker. That's the problem. But if you turn the curve on, these areas are darker, and you would think I need to make this lighter, but that's not the case. So again, I need to make these areas darker in my tonal retouching. So I'm going to grab my tonal retouching guy. I'm going to hit the X key to make it my burning color. And I'm going to zoom in here. You'll see it happen. And I'm going to start working. I'm going to now make this area darker that's already darker. And you'll see the green should go away. And it does. So this is how, so again, just remember, solar curves can really help you spot things that you need to know about that you maybe don't. But when you go back to doing your dodging and burning, remember, you're only either making shit lighter or darker. And if the solar curve has inverted it, if the solar curve has made all your dark, well here, I'll show you a solar curve that would actually be exactly what I'm talking about. Go ahead and throw this number 1 curve away. We're going to add another just regular curve on top of this. And we're going to invert the curve. So I'm going to grab the black point and drag it all the way up on the left-hand side, and then grab the white point and drag it all the way down on the right-hand side. I've now inverted this image. So now everything on this image that was dark has been made light, and everything that was light on this image has been made dark. So even though I would never really use this as a solar curve to retouch with, when you take a look at that same area, remember this is the highlight. If I wanted to bring down this highlight on her nose right here, it's actually darker in my image right now, but that's a highlight. If you turn the curve off, you'll see that this area is actually too light, although it's really not too light. I'm just using this as an example. This is another one of those examples of keeping the skin tone, the highlights and the shadows in the skin tone. You want to keep those. You don't want to eliminate those, or her face becomes flat. But at any rate, at this stage of the game, again, I have to remember that this is now, even though my image looks darker because of the solar curve, when I'm doing the tonal retouching, if I wanted to eliminate this, I need to make the image darker. So I've got my burning color on here, and you'll see as you start to actually do it around the image, it's going to then appear to be lighter on your image due to the solar curve. Does that make sense to everyone now, what I'm talking about? Okay. I'm going to show you just a couple of other solar curves really quickly. You can leave this inverted curve on here. It doesn't matter because we're going to just add a completely different one. So come over to your menu, the drop-down menu, again for your Properties panel, down to Load Curve Preset. Sorry, that came up with Save Curve Preset. That's not what I want to do. Load Curve Preset. Navigate again to your Solar Curve panel and click on number 2 and say OK to that. And you can see that this is a completely different version of a solar curve. So it's sort of you ultimately end up having to go through these. I can't tell you what a curve should look like. I can't tell you which one will actually do the best job for you. This is a really trial and error kind of thing. But this is another way to spot things that will actually either help or hurt you in doing your retouching. So are there questions about this part? All right, I want you to close this guy up. I do want to go back after our red Corvette from session number 1. I've decided I'm going to keep running that guy through every single class we do. No, it's going to be a go back to all the time. So again, remember, we're looking for a red car. Mine is in my class session number 1 folder. It's the redcar.psd. .psd. So if we zoom into the front of the car, there's a highlight that's happening right on the front bumper. So take a look at my screen if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's this area that's right in here on this front bumper. And I want to get rid of that highlight in here. And to do that, again, I could use a solar curve on here. But let's say for some reason I don't want to use this. I'm sorry, I could use a regular tonal retouching on this. Let's say for some reason I don't want to do this. I want to use Clone Stamp Tool to actually get rid of this part right here. In looking at it right now, this thing that I struggle with here is that where do I do my sample from? So again, remember, if you're going to do Clone Stamp Tool, so hit the S key to get to the Clone Stamp Tool. I'm going to make my Clone Stamp Tool much smaller. I'm going to check to see the edge of my Clone Stamp Tool. I want this to be 50% hardness. That's the default for the Clone Stamp Tool. I'm going to do normal blending mode. I'm going to take my opacity all the way back up to 100 and my flow all the way up to 100. Sorry. My tools are not sticking. make my clone stamp tool smaller. But again, do I sample over here on this edge where it's a sort of a medium color of this metal? Do I go on the left side of her edge where it's clearly a darker tone here? Do I come up onto the top of the car? Do I pick something up in here? You don't really know where to actually do this from. So to start off first, we're going to make a copy of this layer, Command J. And then we're going to actually add a curve to the top of this, and I'm going to go looking for solar curves to see if I can find something that will help me decide where my source should actually be. So I'm going to go through all the solar curves that I've added for you guys. So up to the menu in the Properties panel, down to Load Curve Preset. And I'm going to pick the very first solar curve and say Open. What do you mean?
None of the curves are showing up on my presets.
So did you add a curve from the bottom?
Yes.
So you added an adjustment layer,
Yep.
and then you clicked on the menu up at the very top and you came down and said, I want you to load a curve preset, correct?
Yeah.
And then you should get a dialog box that opens up and you can navigate to your session number 6. And inside your session number 6, there should be a thing that says solar curves, not solar curve images, but solar curves.
Okay.
And there's 10 of them. Pick the first one. Okay. So in this case now, I can actually see very well where I want to actually pick this color from. So I can see it's sort of a combination when I'm actually looking at this area right here. I don't want to go after this really dark blue part of this area right in here. I'm getting this sort of like general kind of coloring in here. It's a good mix of half of the bluish color and half of that sort of pinkish color in here. And I'm looking around on the rest of my image and I'm thinking to myself, okay, this area all the way up over here has got that same sort of like color vibe to it. It's this area over here. This is the one that I'm actually going to use as my source to fix this guy. So I'm going to go back to my retouching area right here. Oh, let's see if we find another solar curve that will be a little bit better, because I want to show you that we can go back and forth. So still stay on your solar curve level. We're going to add solar curve number 2. So go again back up to that drop-down menu, down to Load Curve Preset. And in this case, we're going to pick solar curve number 2 and say Open. That's not helping me at all. I'm going to load the next couple of ones. Again, up to that same menu, down to Load Curve Preset. And I'm going to go after my solar curve number 3. In that case, not going to help me, but look at the curve. Look at what's going on in here. This is how wild these things get. The tonal range of this, which is the white line, has almost been completely inverted for any tone below midtones. Then the quarter tones have been flattened. The highlights are still somewhat the same, but they've been suppressed. The green channel has been inverted. The yellow channel has been inverted. The blue channel has not been inverted, but the contrast is massively knocked down. You can see how insane these things get. I'm going to add one more curve just to see if I've got something else up on there. So I'm going to add one more curve preset. And I'm going to go after solar curve number 4. And say Open. And this gives me sort of a better idea. It's really not ideal for me. I think my curve number 1 gave me the best discrimination about what was really going on in this space and where I could find source that would actually fix it. So if you now go to your drop-down menu, the preset menu that exists in your Curve Properties panel, you'll have a preset drop-down and you can see, you can go back to your solar curve number 1, and as long as you use the computer that you're on and you never reset the preferences, these solar curves will always be there for you. You don't have to load these. Once you've loaded them all, they'll be there for you to be able to use from now on out. If you build a solar curve that you want to keep yourself, go ahead and create the curve, whatever it looks like. Come back up to that same little 3-line drop-down menu, come down and say Save Curve Preset, and you can then name it whatever you want to. Typically, curves are saved inside of Photoshop, and this is going to put it in my solar curve panel right here. The place where curves typically are stored, if you go to your application folder, into Adobe Photoshop, my version is 2024, inside of presets, into curves, this is where they're normally saved. So you'll see there's the canned ones for Photoshop are already in here. So that's where you would actually, if you're going to save a curve, put it in here, and then you can actually get to it from now forevermore. So I'm going to cancel that part out. I'm going to click on my drop-down menu and go back to my solar curve number 1, because that's the one I think that gave me the best delineation between the two. So I'm looking at the area that's right next to it. That's a good candidate for it. And then I'm also looking at the area that's up on the hood of the car. That again, I'm looking for that mix of this sort of like bluish area and the magenta area. I'm looking for that mix. I'm going to start with the area that's right down here. So I'm going to make I've got my clone stamp tool is selected. I'm going to actually make it a little bit smaller brush. I'm going to hold down the Option key. Again, now you need to be working on your retouching layer, on your pixel retouching layer. I'll go ahead and rename this Pixel Retouch. And say OK to that. I'm going to sample that sort of like broken up area that's right into here. Hold down the Option key to click on that to sample, and then I'm just going to start working on my image. And I'm going to resample quite a bit. So I'm just going back and I'm holding down again from different spots in here to actually try to get this to be sort of more blended into that same area in here, maybe this area in here to kick that in a little bit more, and up into here. And again, solar curves, I know people who retouch metal, people who do cars, they use these things to death, because it's really hard to spot places that you want to see on an image to actually give you that same kind of vibe. So I'm going to turn off my solar curve and sort of see how I did. And if we go back and forth here, you can see actually that did a pretty fair job. I've got a little bit of retouching line right here that I can sort of see in this area right in here. So if I want to fix that area in here, I would actually go to my healing brush, because remember what healing brush tool does, I'm going to do the regular healing brush. It's actually going to try to blend colors in for an area, so I'm going to make my healing brush smaller. I've just got a really hard line here. If I sample, again, it doesn't matter what, I'm not bringing color over to this, I'm bringing texture. So I can sample up here in the body of the car, just holding down the Option key to click that as a sample, and then coming over into this area and running it across. And all it does is it blends in that line. And so this is now my before and after. But tonally, I knew exactly where to pick that from, and it fit into the car perfectly, which is so much easier to do with that solar curve than it is to do it when you're just looking at all this metal, trying to figure out where the fuck am I going to pull this from. Does that make sense, everybody? What's going on? Did that work for everyone? All right, you can close that up. Gee, thanks, Versa, for telling me about the black and white image layer that would have saved my eyeballs from 16 hours of looking at that skin tone. Oh, you're welcome. Okay, so on to split frequency. So if you take a look in our session number 7, that's where we are right now. There's an entire folder for just split frequency. And if you open this up, there's inside of that, there's a couple things that I just want to point out to you. There is a thing here called split frequency images. This is the one, that's where you'll get the images that we're going to work on today in class. There is the ultimate guide to split frequency separation. This is, if you take a look at this, it explains the whole process behind it, but more importantly, there are 2 recipes that you need to do for one method of splitting your image into frequencies, and I'm going to talk about what frequencies are in just a minute. Both of those recipes exist in this PDF. So if you come down to it, it's this thing right here. It's these 2 recipes. You'll see if you open, well here, I'm going to go ahead and open it up just so that you guys can see this. It's this right here. Stop. So it's these two recipes right here, 8-bit color and 16-bit color depth. They're two different recipes to do your split frequency work depending on the bit depth of your image. Now, all the work that's been turned in so far in this class that I can remember anyway has been done in 8-bit, and so if that's the case, you would use this recipe right here for 8-bit images. If you're working in 16-bit, you would actually use this recipe for 16-bit. The result at the end of it all will be the same, and then how we use that will all be the same, but just realize that those two things are separate. And until you do a lot of split frequency work, you're not going to remember these recipes. So this is where they are, and this is how to refer to get back to them. Make sense? So, and if you want to read more about this, that's actually the place to go in here, if you want to know more behind the scenes about all of that. But I'm going to go back into our image right here, back into Photoshop. Actually, I'm going to go to my Finder, and we're going to open an image so I can explain to you what frequency really is so that you have some idea of what the hell it is we're doing and how we're going about doing it. So anyway, that's the Ultimate Frequency Guide. There are additional steps that I take to make your split frequency work non-destructive, because you'll see as we first start out, you'll see there's another PDF here that shows you additional steps that you need to take so that you can actually go back in time no matter how old your image gets. So we'll talk about that in a second. Then there's also a second method for doing your split work that involves a high-pass filter. We're going to look at that. And then finally, there are settings for using the mixer brush. There are certain things that we do in split frequency work that really demand the mixer brush, and these are the settings that you want to use for the mixer brush. If you use these, it'll work out extremely well for you. So that's going to be our day. We're going to go through all of this. To start our day, I'm going to actually ask you to open up the split frequency images, and there is an image that's called Split Frequency Retouch Image. It's another green screen girl. So if you can just open that guy up, this is basically what it looks like. I'm going to zoom in on this quite a bit, and we need to have a conversation then about frequency and what is. Basically, when we talk about high frequency and low frequency, we are now talking about spatial frequency. Don't let that flip you out. This is not a physics class, but it helps you to understand, hopefully, what we're talking about doing here. If you take a look at this girl, so let me get this image open, right? Okay, if you take a look at this girl's skin right here, you can see, if you zoom in really hard in there, she's got a few, there's some pores, there's a few bumps in her skin, all of that kind of stuff is happening in here. There's actually a little bit, she's got some makeup on, a little bit of blush here, whatever. But if we take a look at this image and you think about moving through this image, if I were to take my cursor and just sort of like run across the image and look at my info readouts so again, I'm looking at my RGB readouts here, nothing changes very much. This is an area of very low change. So as I'm going across the image, it's pretty close to the same skin tone all the way along there. I don't really have a lot of detail in this. It's pretty much just color and a little bit of tone. That is low frequency. If, on the other hand, we come up here to her eyeball and you actually take a look at this, so let's think about the area that's around her eye, so the eyelashes, the skin that's behind it. If I do that same move over here, I have got wild jumps in my tonal response. So again, take a look at your tonal curve, at the tonal readout up in here. I'm in the highlight of the eyeshadow that's on the top of her eye. I'm in the 230s, I'm in the high 200s. The minute I cross one of her eyelashes, I drop down. I'm all the way down here into the 75s, whatever. I'm getting a lot of action that goes back and forth very, very, very fast because I have detail. And every time I go from one piece of detail to the next, everything changes wildly. And this all happens in a very tight, compressed space. That is high spatial frequency, and it is detail. So what we need to be thinking about here is that low frequency basically is tone and color. High frequency is detail and texture. Exactly what you said. So you were absolutely right on that part. But now you know why they call it frequency. So again, low spatial frequency, tone and color, high spatial frequency, detail and texture. That's the thing that you need to keep in mind about that. So the advantage of doing split frequency work is this, and everybody, you guys, I know you've all run into this problem, especially when you're using the conventional retouching tools, when you're using the healing brush tool or you're using the clone stamp tool. The problem that you run into is that when you are actually using those tools, you're not only changing texture, you're changing tone regardless of the tool that you use. And so if you want to change the texture but keep the tone, how do you do that? You can't do that using either the healing brush or the clone stamp tool because they change everything. Does that make sense? You're going to see here in just a second. So what split frequency does is it allows us to create two separate layers. We split the frequency. And in one layer we keep all the low frequency, and in the other layer we have all the high frequency. And what that really means is that in the low layer we keep all of the tone and color, and if we make changes there, we are only changing tone and color. Or we're working in the high frequency, which lets us deal with only texture and detail, but not impact tone or color. So we're splitting them to be more discriminate in the parts that we're trying to retouch. And it works out really well. It's going to make your retouching a whole lot faster. Again, it preserves the things that I want to preserve, because you already know that when I'm talking about retouching skin specifically, but this is all retouching. Maintaining texture is critical, unless it's texture that you are intent on removing, in which case it's not. But does that sort of make sense to everyone? All right, so I'm going to show you how to do split frequency. The way you're going to see this a million times, any YouTube video that you watch or that you read, whatever, I'm going to show you that method. I'm going to also show you, again, how to do this in a way that allows you to go back and undo all of those parts, even if you close your image and open it up again. And then finally, I'm going to show you a completely method for also how you achieve the same split that not a whole lot of people know, but depending on your circumstances and on your image, could actually be really critical for you and something that you really want to know and understand how to do. Okay, so do this with me, please. We'll take our time. If I start going too fast, just stop me. I want everybody to get this because there's a number of steps to go through. We'll do it a couple of times, but so I just want to make sure everybody stays on that page. We good? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make two copies of our background layer. So Command J, and you just make two copies of it. So I'm going to scooch my layer palette up so that you can see all three of these the whole time we're doing this. So the first thing we're going to do is take the middle layer, the one that's called layer number 1, and we're going to change its name. And this is important. You need to get into naming your layers now, because once we go into doing the actual split work, you need to be able to target your layers, and if you don't know what they're named or what they're supposed to be, then you won't know how to target them. So anyway, you're going to name this middle layer here low. And again, some people will call it low frequency, some people, I just call it low. And then we're going to go up to the one on the very top and double click it, and we're going to call it high. And so that's how I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to have low frequency in the middle layer and high frequency on the top layer. So turn off the eyeball for your high layer and select the low layer. So my high layer, I've turned off the visibility, and I'm only going to work on my low layer right here. I'm also zoomed in at 400% on this girl's eye. You actually probably want to do this work more at around 100%. This is a better place to do it, although that seems a little too small for me. So I'm actually going to do it at a 200%. You don't really want to do this work zoomed into 400 or 500% here. It'll throw off your perception of what really is low and what's really high. And so my goal now in this is to actually blur this image right now to the point that I feel like I've lost what I would consider to be texture and detail. So to do that, you come up to the filter menu, down to blur, over to Gaussian blur. Again, you do not do this on smart objects because we actually need to paint and do clone stamp work and all sorts of healing work on these layers. So we are going to destroy these layers, so they can't be smart objects or we wouldn't be able to do that work. In my case, I've got a radius of 5 and I'm going to drag mine down. I'm going to start off, again, I'm just going to drag across the number here in my radius and I'm going to hit a 1. And what I'm looking for is I want to lose detail. Well, what do I mean by detail? Well, the first thing that I can tell you in here is that all of those little highlights and shadows of her eyeshadow up there, I know I need to lose those. I know I also need to lose the lines that are actually underneath her eyes. I need to get rid of all of that. However, you don't want to overblow this. You want to get just as much as you need to remove the detail. So this 1 is not going to work for me. I just hit the delete key and type in 2. I can still see the lines that are underneath, the discrete lines. When I blur the area that's underneath her eye enough, I'll still have the shadow. Again, the shadow is tone and color, but what I'm trying to get rid of are those discrete little lines. If you take a look at her skin and her face, you can't really see this on the projector screen, but if you take a look at this on your screen right now, you can actually still see texture in her skin. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm actually trying to get rid of right here. So I'm going to hit the delete key and hit 3 really quickly. I still feel like I'm seeing discrete texture in there. Delete 4. And this is the first place where I feel like I'm really beginning to get what I'm looking for. I'm going to zoom into this eye so you can see with a blur of 4 pixels, I've really lost those lines that are underneath her eye. I still keep the shadow tone, but I've really lost those. If you take a look at her eyelashes, I can see a difference. The eyelashes are still separate. I'm not looking to lose that, but the character of those eyelashes is gone. There's no dimension to them. I don't see any texture of each eyelash. I just see these blocks of dark area in my image. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on here? So this for me is probably a good place to stay with this. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And so now what we have here is the low frequency. That's what this image is that we've got right now. So to get the high frequency, what I want to do is, if you take a look now, click on your high button, click on your high layer and go ahead and turn the image on. This has got everything. This is a copy of my original image. So this layer has not only got my low frequency, it's also got my high frequency. However, I have got the low frequency is sitting on this middle layer. So my goal in this is to subtract the low frequency from this that's got both, and what I will be left with is the high frequency. Does that make sense, the goal here? Who did I lose on that one? Okay, I'm just going to say it again one more time. Currently, my high layer right now is an exact duplicate of my background. It's an exact duplicate of the image I brought. I haven't done anything to it. It has both high frequency and low frequency in it. My middle layer, when I did all of that blurring, got rid of the high frequency, and the only thing that remains is the low frequency. So if I subtract that information that's on my low layer, all the low frequency, if I subtract that from this layer that's up on the very top, the high frequency is what remains. So this is how you do it. So make sure that the high layer is selected. Come up to your image menu, down to apply image. So I'm going to wait for everybody to get here. we haven't used apply image in this class yet. Most of you guys have never ever used apply image. This is actually one of the oldest things in Photoshop. It's been around forever, and it does this kind of work. There's reasons that it's so much older, but at any rate. So up to the image menu, down to apply image, and a dialog box will open up. And in the dialog box, you will see in your drop-down menu, if we had more than one image open, you would have all of those images selected here. You do all of your split work in the same image though, so we would not change to a different image. In the layer that's dropped down here, we're going to click that and come down to low, because what we're saying that we want to do is the source, what we're saying here for source, and you see we've got a source and we've got a target right here. What we are doing is that this is going to allow us to subtract the low layer from the layer that we're working on right now, the one that's actually called high. So again, select your layer here in the drop-down menu to low, and then in the blending mode that we're going to pick for this, click on the drop-down menu and come down to subtract. So again, what I'm doing is that I'm saying for this layer that we're calling high, I want you to subtract the low layer information from it. And what will ultimately remain will be the high frequency part of this image. We're not done yet. You need to make sure that your opacity is at 100% and your scale is set to 2 with an offset of 128. So what scale and offset are doing for us basically is we're subtracting the tones from the low frequencies, we're subtracting that from the high frequency, or from this layer. What we're left with is a high frequency part of it. However, the scale set at 2 is giving us an average, which we need, and then the offset, what that's doing is that without the offset, this image essentially would be black or really, really, really dark. What the offset is doing is it's actually going to fill this image with with a gray of 128. Basically what it's doing is it's saying anything that we don't want in this image, we are going to make it 128 on a tonal scale. So what that is that when we use the blending modes on this layer, just like we did with our soft light layer, you remember when you were using your tonal retouching for soft light? When we built the soft light layer, we said we wanted to fill that soft light layer with 50% gray, so that but you don't see that 50% gray. Again, 50% gray disappears. We're doing that same trick here. We're saying, okay, everything in this image that we are removing, we're actually going to make it middle gray, and then we're going to set a blending mode to that ignores 128, that ignores that middle gray so that you don't see it. And when you go through all of that, your image should look like this. It should look grayscale like this, and you should be able to see detail in it. Does everybody got that part? Anybody not? Okay, so then go ahead and say okay to that. And then finally, we need to change the blending mode of our high layer. So click on the drop down for the blending mode and come down to linear light. And when you let go, it should look like your image has come back the way you thought your image was supposed to be. You need to check to make sure it is. So to check to make sure it is, hold down the Shift key to select the low layer. So now I've got both high layer and low layer selected. Go to the menu item, the drop-down menu, all the way to the right of the tab that says Layer. Click on this drop-down, and you want to say New Group from Layers. This is exactly what we did on the metal image earlier today. This is going to come up, and I'm just going to call this FS. I typically capitalize it and just call it FS and say OK. It stands for frequency separation. So now to make sure that you did everything correctly, you need to then turn the eyeball on and off of your frequency separation. If you see any change at all, you've done it wrong and you need to start over. If it looks like nothing is changing, and in my case nothing is changing, you've done it correctly. We good on this part? Okay, you need to open this back up. So the way that this ultimately works is that we are going to do work on the high layer to fix the tonal, to fix the texture and the detail that we need to fix. And then we're going to go to the lower one to fix the tone and color that we actually need to fix. Does that sort of make sense? But remember, I told you the problem with this is that if I go in right now on my low layer and I just start doing brush work on it, I'm using mixer brush or a regular brush to paint, to do any of these things, whatever, there's no way for me to undo it. If I try to undo it, I have to basically throw the layer away and start all over again. And the problem with that is this. If you were to do a whole bunch of split frequency work on this, save your file, come back to this a week from now, open it back up, and realize that you had made a mistake, the only way to recover is for you to run frequency separation again. But do you remember the radius that we use for the blur? Anybody?
4.
It was 4. Are you going to remember that in a week? Especially if you've done 15 other images and each one of them has their own unique radius. Again, that becomes a problem. So I do know people who will do this. There were people who will actually put the radius that they used in the title of the layer. Don't do that.
Why?
There's an easier way. I'm going to show you how you can always recover, how you can always go back. And so this is how you recover and you always go back. Click on your low layer to make it active and hit Command J and leave it named exactly like it is. You've now got a low copy. All of the work we're going to do is going to be on low copy. It's not going to be on low. Low is my virgin. I can always, if I screw something up, I can always go back to the low layer that I have never touched and either copy it or clone from it to actually fix stuff on my low copy that is screwed up. And I don't have to remember any radius. I don't have to remember anything. So it created a virgin for it. Does that make sense, everyone? So unfortunately, we're going to do the same thing for high, but high is a little more complicated. So click on high and hit Command J. You'll notice immediately that your image gets really crunchy. It actually amps up the contrast in this considerably. This is not what we want, but we're going to fix this right now using different blending modes to actually make this work. So the first thing that we're going to do with this copy is that you need to change the blending mode from linear light back to normal. Now when you do that, you get what looks like a high-pass filter on this. That's not what we really want here. What we want is to keep that same blending mode, but we can't double it up. We can't have it so it's, well, the reason this is happening is that the original high layer is hitting this with contrast, and then this one is actually hitting it again. However, if we clip these two layers together, the top layer inherits everything from the layer that's underneath it. And what clipping means is that, well, here, I'm going to show you what clipping means really quickly. So if you've done all this, turn off your high copy, turn off your low copy here as well, turn off everybody except for your background copy, and just come down to your background copy. Has everybody got this? Just the background copy to show? Okay, we're just going to add an empty layer on top of that, and on the empty layer on top of it, I'm just going to grab my brush, and I'm going to just do a quick painting of something in my brush like that. So I'm just doing brush work like this. I had a dark brush on here, so I'm just doing something on that empty layer. I'm then going to add a layer a curve on top of this guy. So we're going to add an adjustment curve, and on the adjustment curve, I'm going to invert the curve. So what that means, basically, we've done this before. I'm going to grab the black point at the bottom on the left-hand side and drag it all the way to the top, and then do the top one and drag it all the way down. It basically just inverts the image. It's making everything that was dark light and everything that was light dark, right? And so the darkness that I ended up with on this layer actually comes, it was very dark, and now is coming out almost white. But then my image, you can see the image becomes a negative. Does that make sense to everybody what's going on? So everybody's got this weird looking image, right? If you hover your cursor between the curve and that layer, so again, I'm just hovering my cursor right between the two, and hold down your Option key, your cursor will change to a little square with an arrow that points counterclockwise and down. click when you have done that. What this does is that you'll see now the curve itself, the icon for it, has shifted over to the right, and that little arrow, that little counterclockwise arrow is pointing down now. You pick that up right here. What this is doing is that I have now clipped this curve to the layer that's underneath it, and therefore it only impacts the layer that's underneath it. It has no impact on my image at all. This is only going to affect the curve, the layer number 1 that I've got underneath this. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? So this really allows you to control. I'm not going to hit my whole image. I'm just going to hit part of it that I want to clip this to. You can unclip it doing the same thing. Hover your cursor over the two, between the two, hold down your Option key and click, and it will unclip it. And now it's affecting my entire image. You'll see that that little arrow that's pointing down, the whole icons of my layer moved back to the left. It looks normal now. You'll also notice if you take a look at your Properties panel that that same little icon exists at the bottom of your Properties panel on the left-hand side. It's that same little square with the arrow that points down. You can use that to actually clip and unclip as well. Make sense to everyone? Okay, so throw your curve away. Throw your whatever you did on layer number 1 away. Turn on your low image, turn on actually all of your images, all your layers, and then select high copy. So in high copy, we're back here. I've reset the blending mode to normal. However, high, which is underneath it, is still set to linear light. When I clip this top high copy to the low, it will inherit that linear light. So again, the addition in the Properties panel of that little clipping icon, we don't actually see it here, so you're going to have to use the trick that I just showed you. Hover your cursor between high copy and high, hold down the Option key, you'll get that strange little icon, click on it, and it will shift over, and now your image will actually look like the original image did. Did that happen for everyone? Okay. Okay, so on your image right now, you're on high copy at the very top, right? Good, and is your blending mode in the layers palette set to normal? Now it is. Yeah. Is the high, the layer that's right underneath it, still set to linear light? Yes. Okay, fine. Then hover your cursor right between high and high copy, hold down your Option key, and click. I have no idea what that was. Okay, throw high copy away because you don't have anything on it. Yeah, and let me see, turn on, you don't have anything on your low copy either. You haven't split this, so throw away high as well. Throw away low copy as well. Turn on low. Good. And that's got an F in it. I don't know that I would get rid. Yeah, I would. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Oh.
No, that's fine. And it's been blurred. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. So then make a copy of your background, the original one, the very bottom one, and drag it on top of your low. Rename it high. Turn it on. Eyeball. Come up to the apply to image, down to apply image. In this box it opens, click low, or your low F. Right? Come down to subtract, scale, go ahead and say OK to that. That is not right. Well, we'll see what happens. Change the blending mode of this now from normal down to linear light. Yeah, and you're back where you need to be. Okay, so then click on your low and just hit Command J. And you got that copy. Do the same for high now. Perfect, and see, you pick up a lot of contrast in there. So we're going to change that blending mode to normal. Perfect, and then hover right between high and high copy. Hold down your Option key, click. And you're good to go. So now all the work that we do is going to be on our copies, and if we screw something up, we have a version of it underneath it that we can go and grab source from to fix our problem. Does this make sense to everybody what's happening? Okay, so let's do some work on this guy. So first things first, I'm actually going to go after the fine little hairs that are on the side of this girl's lip. So on the left side of her lip, you can see there's some really fine little baby hairs. Now, there are people who would go in and retouch these one at a time. That's the $2,000 a day person who got booked to do Julia Roberts for L'Oreal, and they're paying them $200,000 to do that one image. That is not what we are going to do today. So here's the trick. That hair is texture, it is detail, that is high frequency. So we are going to do high frequency work. So make sure that you've got your high copy, your high copy layers selected, and grab a piece of paper and a pencil because you need to write this down. These are the tools that you use. And if you pay attention to this part, this will change everything for you. So when we're talking about doing frequency, high frequency work, we're talking about texture and we're talking about detail, you want to use the clone stamp tool for that because it will give you a perfect match of tone. Again, it will clone detail and texture, and that's what you want. However, you need it to be pretty hard. We need to set that clone stamp tool so that it's actually much harder than you would typically use it, because typically when you're using the tool, you want it to be a little more forgiving. You want to blend in the edges and that kind of stuff. That's not what we want to do here. So instead, I'm going to show you how to set it up. So go ahead and hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. In your palette that's up at the very top, click on the drop-down menu. The clone stamp tool is a brush. You need to really crank your hardness up. We're not going to go up to 100%, but I'm going to go up to probably around an 85%. It's an extremely hard brush that's got a very quick fall off on the edges of it. So instead of my texture spreading out slowly over an area and running into the problem of mixing older texture with newer texture, you actually get rid of that part and you make for a much harder, more discrete edge. That's what we want in here. Leave your blending mode at normal, the 100% opacity and 100% flow on this. This is how you're going to set that brush up. We're also going to use the healing brush tool, but that is a tool that we only use down in the low layer here, because the healing brush tool is all about, even though it does copy texture, we're going to use it in a world that has no texture. So what it does is, again, it looks at areas that are surrounding the brush and it mixes those in, it blends those in to get rid of those hard edges. So in the tonal low work that we're doing, you use the healing brush tool. So if you hit the J key or go to your healing brush tool in its drop down, again, not the spot healing brush tool, not the remove tool, but the healing brush tool. For its brush, you actually want to keep it, I'm going to leave it at 50%, that's the default of it. I'm going to leave it at 50% hardness because, again, it's a blending part, sorry. Normal blending mode, and then again, you have no control over this in terms of flow or opacity. So we are working on our high layer. Back to the clone stamp tool. That is the tool that you will use for 99.9% of this. There's a couple of other tools that we might be able to use, but that's basically the one that we're going to use for this guy. So there are people who will do this as well. There are people who do not want to see this image in its entirety. They only want to see the work that they are going to do. If you're that kind of person, hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball for your high layer. I'll show you what I mean by this. Hold down the Option key and click on it. It turns everybody else off, and now you can see what it is you're really trying to do. I'm going to try to take the texture of her skin up here and replace the skin that's up here, the skin that's got all of that fine little hair on it. I'm going to try to use this. Now the thing to remember about this too is, if you look on the side of this girl's face, like if you come over and look at the left side of a girl's face, you can see it's not only out of my light, but it's also out of focus. It's actually gone to the side. this is not a place to use your source from. This is now not got the same focus as her upper lip. We're going to replace the skin of her upper lip, but we need to do it with something that makes sense from a focus point of view and also skin point of view. We need to replace it with skin, but we also need to replace it with skin that is in focus the same way it would be as her upper lip. Now, there's places that has skin all over this girl's face. You don't have to do it something that's nearby, but it has to have the same focus to it. You don't need to worry about tone anymore. That's actually tone and color don't matter to us anymore. Does that make sense? All right, so some people will work on this alone. I'm not going to work on my alone. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball again to bring everybody else back on. Again, I'm working on my high copy. I'm going to come up into an area, and I can see right here, you can see that there's this one line. Some people call these laugh lines or frown lines. There's a line, I'm looking right up under her nose, so take a look at my screen to see what I'm talking about right here. This is a really big area of skin that I can use, but I've got this one blemish that's right in the middle. I want to get rid of that guy first. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and click. You need to make sure that you are only working on current layer, not current and below, because otherwise that will pull some of your color work, your low frequency work up into your high. You don't want to do that. And then I'm simply going to run right down here, and it gets rid of that. And you can see it's incredibly subtle, but it's gone. And the advantage of that is that we didn't bring any color with it. It's just gone. And so now I've got a large area of skin that I can actually work with, so I can actually make my brush a little bit larger. Hold down the Option key to set a source point up here, and then come over to the area where it's actually got all of those little fuzzy hairs, and I can start to actually bring this and pull it down. But you'll also notice I've got my source point is this little baby X that's sitting off to the side. That shows me where my source is. And I'm beginning to leave the area of in-focus skin. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to resample another area of skin. So I'm coming up somewhere else in here at a different spot. I'm going to click on that to resample skin. And then I'm going to continue to do this other work. And you can see in my case, I've got this set to align. Some people will undo this align so that they always go back to the same spot, but that introduces predictable skin. So you'll end up seeing, it's almost like your skin has become a pattern. So do not do that. But again, I'm going to resample another point and just get rid of this. So I'm constantly resampling points. Because I'm using a really hard brush, you can see that I'm actually not worried about contaminating her mouth or her lips. And so this is now the retouching that I did to get rid of that hair. But you'll see I not only replaced it with skin, but look at this. If you zip back out, this whole side of her face, the lip that we're talking about right here is in shadow. The area where I've pulled the texture from is not in shadow. If I had just used the regular clone stamp tool on a complete copy of this, not a split version, but a regular version of this, whatever, it would have lightened up all the shadow that's on the side of her face because this area that I'm picking it from has more light hitting it. But that fucks up my image. The shadow on the side of her face is meant to be there because this is being lit from the right side. You can see where my highlights are, and I've got shadow on this side. If you eliminate that shadow, her mouth no longer curves back. Her mouth actually just is flat. Does that make sense what's going on? You can't do things like this kind of hair retouching any other way. It's a game changer. Okay, really quickly, we're going to zip onto the other side over here. If you take a look on the other side, not too far away from her nose, it looks like, it's almost like a mole on that side of her face, on this side over here. I'm going to get rid of that mole as well, so I'm still going to be working on my high copy. Then you have to ask yourself, is this in focus or not? Because if you take a look at the upper edge of her lip right here, because of its orientation to the light, it's really flatly lit and it's suppressed all the texture. If you take a look at that upper lip on this side, there's no texture in that. However, where this spot is that I'm trying to fix and retouch, it's in a field of texture. So I cannot do a source from where I'm at right now because what that means will happen is that when I go to do this up here, all of a sudden you're going to have this spot of no texture in a field of texture. So this shows you where you need to pick your source from. You cannot do a source from here and replace this. We need to do something that's much closer to this. Now, I'm not going to go as high up onto this part of her skin up in here, because this skin up in here has actually got even more texture to it. I am going to do something, if you imagine this is a clock face, something that's right around 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock, something like that. It has texture, it's relatively subtle, so I'm going to sample from down here and come up and do the texture across that. It has replaced the texture, but I still see that dot. Why? What?
It's the tone.
It's what?
The tone.
It
The low frequency.
It is low. That's exactly why. This is now no longer texture. This is now color and tone. So we now need to do this same move, but we need to do it on our low layer. So go down to your low copy, not your regular one, but your low copy. Click on that, and in this case, we are not going to use the clone stamp tool. To see what it is we're really doing, hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for low copy, and you'll actually see the tone that we need to fix. You can also spot where we need to fix it from. This is not clone stamp tool, certainly not a hard clone stamp tool. This is healing brush. So come over and grab your healing brush tool. I am going to make my brush a little bit larger. I'm going to sample again. Where is the tone and color the same that I want it to be? In this case, it's pretty much all around her. I'm going to still pick from that same spot that I did for the texture. I'm going to hold down the Option key, click, and then I'm going to come here and actually get rid of all of that part. Then again, hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball. It'll turn everybody else back on. And I have now removed this, but I've managed to maintain the texture in this as well. So it's not visible. To again see whether this is working or not, come up, all of your split frequency work should be in the group called FS. If you turn that eyeball on and off, you'll actually see the work that you've just done. Now, this may not seem like magic to you guys, but just wait. Questions about this? Okay, so go ahead and do me a favor, just save this work as something else, because I want to open this image again. You can save it as, it's not part of your homework. I'm going to save mine, and I'm just going to call it Toss. And I'm going to throw it in my Toss folder. I just want to be able to open this image again and show you another version of how to do this part. In my Toss version, I'm just going to save it here. All right, and then I want to go back to open to my original split frequency retouching image and open it a second time. And zoom in on this guy. I'm going to park my one that I've been working on just off to the side so I can work on this guy. So there are people who struggle with establishing low frequency. How much do you really blur it? So there's another way to go about doing this same split frequency work that will get us to the same place, and I just want to show you how to do that. And so this is how. So again, does everybody have another copy, a virgin copy of this guy open again? All right, it starts out the exact same way. Command J twice, double click on the one that's in the middle, and we're going to call this low. Double click the one on the very top. Sorry, low. Double click the one on the top, call it high. We're going to start with the high layer first. So I'm going to zoom in to that same kind of spot that I was at before. So I'm into my 200% right around this lower part of her face. So in this case, we start with establishing the highlight, the detail. What do we want to keep? So again, we would come up to the filter menu, down to other, over to high pass. And when you open up high pass, it already looks like your image, like it was beginning before. I've already got that gray part that's already happening in here. So this is just basically where we're going to start with this. Yes?
Mine is opening up as the same. I saved it, but it doesn't open up like a.
Then you saved it in the same spot and you overwrote the original one, and you don't have that. That's okay, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay, that's all right. Don't worry about it too much. Just watch this. You'll see, because a lot of people would never even use this, but I just want to make sure you guys understand that this is a possibility, and you'll have it on the video, you'll be fine. Okay, so we're going to start with the high part of this. So up to the filter menu, down to other, down to high pass. And now what we start to do is we start to drag the radius of your high pass up, looking for the detail that you want to keep. So we're doing just the opposite. Now I'm looking for texture and detail that I want to hang on to. One of the things to also look for when you're doing this method is that if you go too high in your radius, I'm going to really crank my radius up. I'm going to go up to like a 5 or a 6 or 7. Let's go up to like a 9. You can see once I get up to the 9, I'm starting to bring color in. You can see a little bit of color above her eye up there. You can see color actually in her eye. We're starting to pull, our radius is so high right now, we're starting to pull not only all the detail in, but we're starting to drag color in as well. And we do not want to do that. This is all about high frequency. All we want in here is going to be our detail and texture. So I'm going to grab this guy and pull it back down again. And ironically, what we're going to end up being is we're going to get really close to that same 4 pixels. So I'm going to not do mine as a 4. I'm going to do mine as a 4.2. Right? And then I'm simply going to say OK to this. So now we've established the high frequency, we need to establish the low frequency, but we need to do something else on here first. And you've got to do it in this order right now. You cannot come back and do this after the fact. So we've gone ahead and run the high pass filter on this. Immediately come over to your image drop-down menu, the drop-down menu, to your image, down to adjustments, over to brightness and contrast. This is the only time I've ever used this menu item ever. This is important. Once this dialog opens up, you have got to enable Use Legacy before you change anything in this dialog box. The reason is that if you change something, well here, I'm going to actually drag my contrast and I'm going to drop it down minus 50% or minus 50. You can actually type this in. I take that back. I'm not going to do it in contrast. It's in brightness, not contrast. Sorry. Zero that bright out, and it's in brightness. Drag your brightness down to a minus 50. If you click Use Legacy now, those things reset. So if you don't know that and you think you've done this correctly, these guys have reset, which will not work for you. So now take your with your brightness up like that. Hang on one second, guys. I got to make sure I'm giving you the right figure here. I've never used this method, but I want to make you aware of it. Hang on one second. It is contrast, not brightness. Sorry. 0 for the brightness and minus 50 for your contrast. Yeah, I've got the range now to actually do it in. And it's an exact minus 50. So you can actually type the value in if you can't get to that, minus 50, and then say OK to this. Now the trick to this is if you're using this, you need to remember the value that we used for the filter setting for the pixel radius that we used in the high pass filter. Who can remember what it was? 4.2. So first off, we're going to change the blending mode of our normal, of this high layer, from normal down to linear light, just like we did with the other one. But now your image looks way too crunchy, right? Now go to your low layer. You don't have to turn off your high layer, just go to your low layer, up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and you have to put in the exact value that you used for high pass. Not close, but the exact value. Mine was 4.2, so I'm going to say OK to that. This now gets us to the very same place. And then again, hold down your Shift key, select both layers, click on the flyout menu, say you want to do a new group from these layers, call it FS, say OK. And then turn that on and off, and if you see any change, you've done this wrong. If you see it being the same, you're good to go. Open these up, and again, click on the low layer, hit Command J to give yourself a copy, Click on high layer, Command J to give yourself a copy of that. Change the blending mode of your high copy from linear light back to normal, and then hover between high copy and high, hold down your Option key, and clip it. And you're exactly in the same spot as we were using the apply image method. How did it do what? Where did I lose you? Say what? Oh, how to group them together? Got it. Sorry. No, I'm anticipating it was all about clipping and all that. I'm thinking, you know, okay, sorry. Yeah, let me just go back in time in history so I can go back when that all is all done. Okay, so I've now got this low image has actually been blurred. Let me make sure I go ahead and do that. Yeah. Sorry. Yep. Okay, select both the high and low layer. I'm just holding down the Shift key to select both of them. They're both highlighted? Okay, then the menu that sits right at the very top across from the tab that says layers, the menu on the right hand side, if you click on that, you'll get a flyout menu. And you want to come up to New Group from Layers. And a dialog box will open up and you just label it FS, that stands for frequency separation, say OK. And then turn it on and off. And if your image changes, you've done something wrong. If it's the same, you're good to go. And then again, I just go through to make safeties of this work so that you can work on low and high layers. Command J to make a copy of your low layer. You don't need to do anything else for it. For your high layer selected, Command J to make a copy of that. Change its blending mode back to normal. And then hover between high copy and high, hold down the Option key, and click to clip high copy down to high, and you are ready to retouch. Yes? Was that just a thumbs up? All righty. Questions about this? It's a lot, but now we're going to see how this will really work for you. So you can close this image up. You don't need to save it. I want to go back and take a look at the other images that we have in our group. So back up to the frequency separation images. And there's an image in here called Wrinkled Green Skirt. If you can open that up into Photoshop for me, that'd be great. I'm sorry, how do you do what?
How do you make it to like open up in Photoshop?
So it always opens up in Photoshop. Hang on one second, I'll show you.
I thought I did that last time.
So make the image active. Don't double click on it, just click on it once to make it active. Hit Command I or go to the File menu and do Get Info. Either way. Then in the kind of almost down near the bottom, it's not at the very bottom, but you'll see an Open With a drop-down menu. You want to click on that and actually pick whatever application you want it to do this in. So there's a bunch of them that'll open JPEGs. But if you want it to always open up in Photoshop, go ahead and click Photoshop. And then hit Change All so that that happens for all JPEGs. And then close that up, and you should be good to go. Okay, so skirt, wrinkled skirt. So how would you guys fix this image? I want to smooth the wrinkles out. But take a look at this. If you zoom in, this skirt has got a lot of texture in it. Take a look at this. I've got the stitching in it, but I've got the actual texture of the fabric that's in here. I've got all of that's in here. I've also got two colors in here. So I can't steal from one color and actually paint it into the other color. I can't do any of those things, right? Say what? You could try to go after this tonally. How happy would, so if I told everybody in this room right now we're going back to tonal retouching, I would have a riot on my hands, right? So we're going to attack this another way. And guess, just a wild stab at what that other way might be. Frequency separation, anyone? So let's go ahead and split it. So again, with this, everybody got this image open? Okay, Command J, double click on the one down in the middle, call it low. Double click on the one that's above it, call it high. Turn off the eyeball for high, select low to make it active because this is the one that we want to blur. I'm going to stay in at my 200% because I really want to be able to see when do I lose the detail, when do I lose the stitching, and when do I lose the texture of the fabric. So again, I'm going to now come up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. Oops, wrong blur. Gaussian blur. I'm going to zero it back out again. And then again, it's already selected, so I'm going to type a 1. And at the one blur on this, I still can see all of that. I'm going to hit delete and go to 2. I can still see that, delete and go to 3. I can still see all that, go to 4. At 4, I've started to lose. Even if you take a look at the stitching, I've lost the white of the stitching. I don't even see that anymore. I do see the texture that's around it, but I don't see the stitching really anymore. I don't see any of the texture of the fabric anymore. So this is where I'm going to go with right here. Now, all of you might be thinking, well, 4 is the magic number here. It's not. Not by a long shot. There are small res images that you'll have to stay underneath 1 pixel to actually do it. There are really high res images that you'll be up around 10. So don't get the feeling this is just coincidence that this has happened. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to then select my high layer by making it active. I'm going to turn on its eyeball so that I can see it again. I'm going to go up to my image menu, down to apply image. It's going to open up. In my layer drop-down menu, I'm going to select low. In my blending mode, I'm going to do subtract, a scale of 2, an offset of 128, and an opacity of 100%. And your image should look, again, like a high-pass filter has been run on it. And I'm going to say OK to that. And then I'm going to change the blending mode of my high layer from normal down to linear light. Then I'm going to click on my low layer and hit Command J to make a copy of it. I'm going to click on my high layer and hit Command J to make a copy of it. I'm going to then change the blending mode of my high copy from linear light back to normal. And then I'm also going to hover between high copy and high, hold down my Option key and clip high to high copy. Then I'm going to select all 4 of those by holding down the Shift key and group them using my drop-down menu on the far right-hand side into a new group from layers and just call it FS. And say OK to that. So then turn the eyeball of your FS on and off, and if your image changes, you've done something wrong. If your image is the same, we're actually ready to go to work on this guy. Shoot.
So for that option and click for the high layer, do we do that for the low layer or not?
No.
No, okay.
I'm going to double click the hand, and basically what I want to do is remove the wrinkles in the skirt, but I want to keep all the texture in the skirt, right? So what are the wrinkles? Are they high or low frequency? Are they tone and color, or are they detail and texture? The shadows. Shadows are tone. The texture of the skirt, the stitches, those are all high. That's all detail. This is low. So that's what I'm going to go after to actually get rid of that part of it all. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to click on my low copy. That's where I'm going to do all of my work. So again, if I fuck something up, I can go back and fix this part. And then I'm going to show you the last tool that you really need to know about this. So I can do a lot of this work using the healing brush tool. I can actually do a lot of this work using just a regular brush. We're going to look at all of that. But I definitely want to show you guys the mixer brush before we get in. We're doing pretty good time-wise, so I think we're going to be able to get through most, if not all of this today. So I want to show you the mixer brush. But to do that, I want you to start with a completely separate file, because I want you, how many people in here have ever worked with the mixer brush? Yeah, I want you to know what this tool can do. It's actually a tool that's designed to emulate painting medium. So it's really designed to function like if you were an oil painter or a watercolor painter. It's designed to function that way. So to see how this thing works, we're just going to make a synthetic file. Hit Command-N to bring up the new dialog box. Again, I'm going to use my drop-down menu here to get to inches, and I'm just going to do a 10 by 8. And I'm going to do it at 300 pixels per inch. And I'm going to just say OK. So it's just a blank file. That's all I've got going on in here. Everybody got this part? OK, I'm going to fill this with a gradient. So hit the G key to get to the gradient tool, or just come over in your tool palette and find it. In my drop-down menu, I've got classic. So again, I'm up in my options palette up in here. If you click on that drop-down menu, I'm going to stick with classic gradient right now because I don't want to spend time explaining all of this. In the type of gradient, so that's the preview that's right next to it. If you click on that drop-down menu and open up your basics panel, you can actually say the very first one is going to be foreground to background. And I'm going to select those. And I've still got my dodging and burning colors. And that's fine. If you want it to be black and white, you can have it. The dodging and burning colors, it just gives me a variety in here. I've got something in here. And then I'm going to go back to a linear gradient. I have a radial gradient that's actually picked. Again, it's the very first of the icons, of the little icons. So I just want a gradient from right to left. So I'm going to click and drag this from right to left and let go. And it just puts a gradient out on this. Then I'm going to go to my mixer brush. And to get to the mixer brush, it's actually in the brush menu. So your brush menu is underneath the clone stamp, underneath the healing brush tool, but above the clone stamp tool. If you click on the little drop down lower right hand triangle part, it should come down to mixer brush. And then you need to then go to the PDF that I've included for you to see how you set up the mixer brush. So if you go to this PDF from our session number 7 inside the split frequency retouching folder, there is a mixer brush setting for retouching. You need to just open that up and take a look at it, and this will tell you how we want to set this. So I'm going to show you what all of these things mean and just refresh my own memory about this. Okay, so I'm probably going to come back to this in just a second. So on the mixer brush, you need to start up here at the very top. And the first two things that matter, you'll see that there's a preview of what your brush should actually look like. When we do the rest of these things, this thing should actually appear clear. So the first icon that's right to the right of it, if you turn this icon on and off, we want to actually turn both of these icons off. So to have both of them off, they're not supposed to look like they are dark. They're supposed to be a knot. So this has everything to do with how your brush performs. So this is what we're going to try to do. Typically with the mixer brush, what happens is that it works just like a paintbrush in real life would work. So let's say you've got a painting that you're working on, and you load your brush up with a big old hunk of black paint, and you start to paint on your image, right? And then you want to paint a different color. So you clean your brush, you then pick up another color and paint another color somewhere else. And that's great because you don't mix the black. But let's say that you're not into doing that, you're really into blending them together. So you do your initial scoop, the big old thing of black paint, and you start painting on it, but then you don't clean your brush. You just grab some other color, some red, and you scoop that up and you start to paint that. Well, then all of a sudden the red and the black begin to mix together. And then if you picked like yellow, then all of a sudden you've got very little black that remains, a lot of red that's probably still there, and then a whole big old chunk of yellow, and that all is mixing together. That's how this tool will really work. We don't want that to happen. What we want to happen is that we want the brush to be cleaned between every single stroke that we make. So the way we're going to set it up is that when you actually hit the brush on your image, it's going to sample the color that you're on. That's the color that you're going to load. Then we're going to paint with it, but the minute you pick your cursor up off the screen, it's going to clean your brush. That's the goal we're going after. So this way we can work around the image without having to clean the brush. So if I want to work on the green side, I can do a whole bunch of work on it, but then if I immediately want to go to the tan side, I don't have to go in there and get rid of the green. It's gone automatically. Does that make sense? It'll make your brush work easier as well. So both of those, and when they are both unchecked, this little preview that is what you're loading your brush color with should show you the checkerboard, which indicates that your ink on your brush now is transparent, meaning there's nothing on it. So is everybody's transparent? Okay, your next settings matter as well. The load, you want to leave this at 100%. What load is, actually I take it back, wetness, we actually need to go after wetness first. So again, I'm going to go back, I'm certain that my figures here are the same. What wetness has to do is with, yeah, we're doing 20, 100, 120, okay. What wetness has to do is basically the edge of your brush. How much, when you're actually doing that brush stroke, do you see a really hard line of it, or how much sort of like spreads out? So it's a relatively dry brush. It's not really, again, this goes up to 100%. The load, you want to leave the load at 100%. That's how much color you're picking up when you lay your brush down for the first stroke. You're going to leave that at 100%. The mix, you're also going to leave that at 100%. So that's how aggressive is when we actually drag this color to another spot. How aggressive is that mix going to be? We're going to keep ours very aggressive. And then the flow. In the flow of this, you want to start with a low flow. We're going to bring the flow down somewhere between 20 and 40% would be a pretty standard area to be. What flow is going to do for you is how aggressive do you want this action to be. So I'm going to say let's start out at 20%. If you feel like it's taking too long for this to happen, you can bump your flow up to 30%, 40%. You'll see mine's already up almost at 80%. I clearly had something that I needed to really get it to be aggressive with. Shantae. It doesn't exist? So if you click on the drop-down menu for your brushes, so right here, you've got a regular brush. Do you have your regular brush tool? And do you have the pencil tool? It's in the same drop-down menu.
Pencil, brush, and color replacement.
Yeah, so this is great. So I'm going to show everybody this. So she does not have the mixer brush, which can happen. It's been happening worse. That seems to be, for me, in working with this newer version, release of Photoshop, this is fixed a little bit. Mine goes disappearing all the time. So to get it back, come up to the Edit menu. Everybody do this with me, though, just so you can see where this is. We went over this in our very first class, but we should do it again. The Edit menu down to Toolbar, and open this up. You should have in the extra tools, Shantae, you'll have this over in the extra tools. Your mixer brush should be living over here somewhere. If we then scroll down, these are the tools and the way they're all built on the tool panel. So again, the Move tool, which is this tool up at the very top, is this grouping right here. The selection tools are right here. You can reorder these guys. You can drag these guys out so that they don't end up in your menu. So this is completely editable, but you want to come down till you get to the brush set. So I'm going to continue to work down right here. So when you have the brush tool right here, Shantae, in your case, over here in extra tools, you should have the mixer brush. And it should look like this. You should be able to grab that mixer brush and drag it and bring it right over into this group right here and let go, and it'll be where it should be. But you all should realize this. I'm going to bring this over here. You can actually make your mixer brush standalone. You can actually just bring it right here and drop it right in the middle, and then you'll see it sits right here in the middle. Or I'm going to add it back to where it actually I'm used to actually having it. So it's just a way to edit all of this stuff, and then just say done. If you can't remember to do any of that stuff, you can also go up to the edit menu down to Toolbar and simply click on Restore Defaults, and you should get the mixer brush. Do you have it? Okay. So then again, back to this. I'm going to drop my flow down to 20%, 25%, whatever. Then I just want you to come over, make your brush kind of big. And again, in the quality of your brush, I'm going to click on my drop-down menu. You still have hardness control. I'm going to drag my hardness, I'm going to leave it all the way down. I'm going to leave it as completely at 0. We'll keep a really soft edge in here. Come over to the dark area of your gradient and click and just drag over, and you'll see it starts to pull color in. It starts to actually mix this stuff up together. You can drag in the opposite direction. It'll mix as well. I've actually got color in mine right now, and I don't know why I've got color in mine. So it's adding a lot of black color in here, and that shouldn't have happened. So I'm going to go back in history. You need to make sure that that middle part in here stays clear. So again, it usually is these icons. So I'm going to click on the first icon. That didn't change it. I'm going to click on the second one. So for me, it's the second, so the first of the icons there does not get pushed down, the second one does, and you end up with this clear pattern on your brush. And now when you click and drag over, you'll see it starts to pull a lot of that color over. Again, mine's not happening very fast, so I can push my flow up. I'm going to take it up so you can really see it to about 70%. And then I can click and drag across, and you'll see it's pulling that dark color into my light color. But I can also do the opposite. I can grab my light color and start to work back in the other direction. So again, I'm just tapping and hitting and dragging across really quickly. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? That's how the mixer brush works. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this, and I'm not going to save that. I'm also going to shut down. Oh God, I've got everything shut down. Shut down Zoom. I'm running out of resources badly. I'm going to get rid of Acrobat. Okay, so back to our image right here. I'm going to zoom into the part of her green skirt on the very top part up in here. And you can see what's going on. And this is, again, this is very much akin to doing the high tonal range work, the large tonal range work. This is really more about smoothing those big areas of skin out. That's kind of what's going on in here. So I'm going to keep zooming into the top up in here. I'm going to drag my flow back down to around 25, 30%, something like that. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to start on an area over here. You can see on the side of her skirt over here on the left-hand side, I've got a pretty neutral color over here. Then I've got a shadow, and then I've got a highlight. So I'm just going to start in my normal area here, and I'm going to drag that ink across. So again, make sure you're working on your low copy, and then just start dragging across really quickly. It doesn't take much. And then my highlight is still dark in here, so I can continue to drag up and to get rid of the highlight part in there. So I'm getting rid of that part. I'm going to start working down now to actually get rid of the small little wrinkle that's sitting on that part right there. Then I've got a bigger area that I can work from right now. So now I'm going to start actually dragging across the other highlight and shadow on this side over here. I've got an area that's up here at the top now, and this is going to be tricky to get to this area up here, because the problem is, so I'm talking about the part that's right underneath her waistband. The problem that I've got with this guy is that it's highlight and shadow, and they're both really deep in here. But if I start using this brush, the mixer brush, like I've been doing before, it's going to, I run the risk of it actually hitting the waistband. And this is color now that we're dealing with, so it's going to change that color. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a regular brush. I'm going to paint this in. We are all the photographers in this room that long to be artists and do paint shit because somehow painting is more art than photography. May all those people burn in hell. I'm just going to do this with a regular paintbrush. So to do that, you're going to go back to the menu, your brush menu, and let's go to a regular brush. I'm going to leave my regular brush as a normal blending mode. I am going to change it. I'm going to leave this. I'm not going to go to completely soft, but I'm going to go like a 25%. I want a pretty soft brush, but I don't want this all over the place because, again, I don't want to spray paint into any of the khaki area of this skirt at all. But I'm going to drop my flow down, and I'm going to bring my flow down to probably a 5%, maybe a 10%. I'm going to try a 5%. When you're working with flow, again, remember what flow is. Flow is transfer of ink over time, and we're really slowing this down. Otherwise, this can just take off on you, and you overshoot your mark, and then you've got to undo it and then set it correctly and go back in. So I'm just going to say, let's start here. If this experience ends up feeling too dragging out too much for you, just taking too long, whatever, you can bump your flow up. But we're going to start with it a low here to begin with. So with this brush selected, I'm going to make it a little bit larger, so it's about the size of this area that I'm trying to deal with in here. A little bit smaller than that. We don't need to worry about shadow and highlight right now. We're going to be painting this middle tone, so it should take care of both of these problems, but we're going to find out right now. Keep one finger on your Option key, because what your Option key allows you to do is if you hold down your Option key, you can click and it will actually sample the color. So I've now loaded the color of green into my foreground color. However, you do not want to do all of your painting with a single color. I am going to resample this green over and over and over and over again, slightly different areas of it to just give me more of an organic color that I'm actually painting with. So again, I keep one hand on the Option key, I'm going to sample a color of green, and then I'm simply going to start scratching across this whole area that's up in the top. Resample another color of green and go after the part that's up in the top. Resample another color of green and go after the sample. I'm getting rid of the highlight now. Resample green to actually pull this out. Resample green. Keep your brush moving, keep everything moving like crazy here, but that actually allows me to get rid of that part up in there. And again, I'm just resampling color after color after color. To get the small little wrinkle up here at the very top, if you really had to go after that guy, make your brush much smaller, and then work your way along that to try to pull that part out. Again, try and do this with a tablet. I'm sorry, with a mouse. I'm sorry, did somebody say something?
Yeah, do you go after, like, low, highlight first and then shadow, or?
It doesn't matter. You're taking both of them, you're knocking the highlight down and you're boosting the shadow up, and it's all the same green. So there's other people that will do this. Hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball for your low copy. Some people feel like it's just easier to see what they're trying to do here, only working on the low copy. And it actually, in many ways, it actually is easier to see this part right here. So I'm going to go back to my mixer brush. And I'm going to start doing the line that goes right down along the seam that's running right in the middle. And if you do this correctly, you can start with the center part of your brush. A lot of times if you come straight down on this, you'll actually pull that guy out, but I feel like I'm contaminating that color a little bit over there, so maybe not so crazy about that, but we'll try. And again, it's sometimes easier to spot where you're going from. So for the darker areas with a mixer brush, you're looking to grab lighter areas, and then you have to go back over your lighter areas with your middle area to actually get it to pop back out. So I'm going to continue to work my way around this guy. You can do this really pretty quick. You can do the other side as well. If you don't like working with the blurred version of it, just hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball again. It'll turn everybody else back on, and you'll be able to see all the texture that you're trying to work with, etc. And double click on the hand and kick back out.
Are we supposed to be tapping?
No, you're painting now. Yep. The tap has gone away. But then take a look at what you've got going here, guys. If you turn on your frequency separation on and off, you've removed all of the wrinkles in this, and then zoom in and take a look. That texture is untouched. Boom, lacka lacka, eureka. questions about this? All right, you can close that guy up. You do not need to save that. That's not part of your homework. We're going to go after the tougher one now. So in the frequency separation images, there's an image at the very top of this called 20210, I don't know, whatever. It's this top image. It's a picture of two women in like Greek togas or something. If you double click on that guy to open it up. So when we get to liquefy, which happens in a week or two, something like that, we have a whole huge conversation about body image, about what retouchers have done in the debate about body image, ideal body images, all that kind of stuff, whatever. We have all of that. We're going to have that conversation. What I'm going to ask you guys to do right now, and actually I'm going to ask you when we do the whole liquefy thing as well, this is not about what I think the ideal beauty is. This is not about what I find attractive. This is not about any of those things. This is just about technique. And I need everybody to be comfortable with that part. So this girl has a bunch of rolls right here at her stomach. I don't think she's fat. I don't think she's heavy. I would never use that word anyway, whatever. It's just something that we all have this, right? If you actually look at my arm right now, it's got lines in it, that kind of stuff, whatever. And if I want to get rid of those, I need to know how to actually do that part. Does that sort of make sense to everybody? So I just want everybody to please understand that I'm incredibly sensitive to this. It gets deeper. I'm glossing over it right now just because we're running out of time. But we are going to spend time in this class really having this discussion and talking about the morality, the ethics of retouching and the implications, social implications of that. I mean, all of that stuff. So I don't want to gloss over that, but I do want to actually deal with this. Are everybody okay with this part? If you're not okay with this, I understand that. You just need to let me know, and we will make accommodations, whatever. I am not here to shame anybody or anything. I'm just here to tackle problems that we would have that not, again, you guys get where I'm going with all this, right? Are we okay with this? Okay. So I'm going to go after this part right here. I'm going to zoom in. So it really is, it's not that, it's just the fact that she's leaning over and she's caused this line kind of situation right here, and I want to fix this part of it all. So there's a million ways of doing stuff in Photoshop. I'm going to show you the method that we can use in this class right now, given the material that we've gone over. We have not gone over liquefy, which is how I would do part of this work later on, but we can get very close to it just using the tools that we've actually got right here. Is everybody good with that part? Okay, so the first thing that I need to do is I actually need to establish a new line for this side of her body right here. So to do that, I'm going to do Command-J to create a brand new layer here. I'm going to double click on it and call it Pixel Retouch. And say OK to that. And then I'm going to go after the pen tool, the P key, and all I want to do is create a new line that goes from, I'm going to actually do it from this sort of like lower part right down in here. So I'm going to click a point, a point down in here, and then I'm going to click another point up here just to put a small curve into her body, into that line right there. And yours doesn't need to be exact. Again, I'm just putting a little shape in here, and then I'm going to come around and come back to my original point to complete the path. I'm going to go into my path palette. I'm going to double click on the word path, and I'm just going to leave it called path number 1. But I don't want to leave this as a work path because you guys already know if we start another path for some other reason, we're going to lose the original one that we made. I don't want to do that. So with everybody got a path going here that sort of gives you that edge. I'm going to command click to load that as a selection. I'm going to feather this, so up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather, and I'm going to throw in a 1 pixel feather on this guy and say OK, because I know I don't want this edge, completely sharp. So that's basically what I'm doing. So I've now got an active selection going, which will control where I can actually do the cloning or not. So I'm going to start over here on the far side. I am going to do this with a clone stamp tool. So the S key to get the clone stamp tool. And you'll see that there are lines in the background behind her. I want to keep those lines going, so I'm going to set a sample point on the far left part before you hit the chain that actually grabs part of that, the texture, the lines of the dark brown lines that are in the background. I'm going to hold down my Option key and click that as a source point, and then come over and click and, I'm sorry, not going to do it there. I'm going to reset that. I'm going to come over to this edge and try to line up that black line, the darker the line that comes through, and I'm just going to go through the whole rest of her body just like that, and it's gone. Command D to deselect. So this has given me more shape. Then it sort of matches the shape of her, of the bra and that kind of stuff, the softness in there. That part's actually working for me. But now I've got to deal with the shadows and the wrinkle parts and all of that kind of stuff. And again, for me, the easiest way to do this is going to be split frequency. So I've got my pixel retouch already done. I'm now going to do my split frequency work. Command J, double click on the first of those copies and call it low. I'm going to go up to my top one, double click on that, call it high. I'm going to turn off the eyeball for high and select low. I'm going to zip in here to actually see where the detail is in here that I want to keep or lose. Up to my filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. And that 4 seems a little hot to me. So again, I'm going to drag over the top, hit a 1. I feel like I can still see detail there. I'm going to go to a 2. That's obliterating the detail pretty good. I'm going to see what a 3 looks like. 3, it's all gone. So I'm going to do 3 pixels for this. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to the 3 pixels for my low layer blur. I'm going to turn on my high layer. I'm going to click on the eyeball so that I can see it. I'm going to go up to my image menu, down to apply image. In my drop down layer, instead of merged, I'm going to pick low and then subtract, scale of 2, offset of 128, and an opacity of 100%, and say OK. You'll get really used to doing this. And then click on my drop-down menu for blending modes and come down to linear light. Then I'm going to make a copy of my low layer, Command J, a copy of my high layer, Command J, change the blending mode of my high copy from linear light back to normal, and then clip high copy to high by holding down the Option key and clicking. Then I'm going to hold, with my top layer selected, I'm going to scroll down to my low layer, hold down the Shift key and click on it so that I've selected all of them. I've selected low, low copy, high, and high copy all at the same time. Go to my flyout menu on the right side and say I want to do a new group from layers in here, and I'm going to call this FS and say OK. And collapse it to make sure that everybody got in there. And it does not look like everybody got in there. It doesn't look like anybody got in there. So I'm going to throw that group away and do the same trick again. FS. Okay. So you did the apply image. So then in your high layer, you need to change the blending mode from normal to linear light. Are you good?
It's not great.
No, it should look like the image. Yeah. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And then click on low and just make a copy, Command J. Go to the high and do the same thing. Good. And then change the blending mode of high from linear light to normal. And then hover your cursor right between those two and hold down the Option key and click, and you're there, good to go. Okay, is everybody else here? This should go pretty quick. Okay. So, what do I need to do? So in looking at this, if you come down and you click on your, hold down your Option key and click on low copy, you can see what is really low, and you can see I do have some texture that's in that crease, the lower crease of her stomach, so I want to get rid of that one first. So I'm going to again hold down the Option key and click so everybody else is turned on. I'm going to go up to my high copy. I'm going to hit the J key to get the healing brush. Again, check to make sure it's the real healing brush. And then I'm going to zip up here and take a look at this area that is that crease. I'm going after the one that's on the bottom. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to then go to the line that's really close to where this actually is, to where it is on her body. I'm going to sample a color, or set my sample point, my source point down below this. I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to simply run this along the top to get rid of that line. I've still got a pretty obvious space in there, but that's not going to be low frequency. That's actually going, that's not going to be high frequency, it's actually going to be low. And then I'm actually going to go after this to see if I can't actually then fix the color and the tone in this. So I'm going to go down to my low copy. I'm going to go after the mixer brush first. And again, the advantage of the mixer brush, make my mixer brush much smaller, is that it'll pick up the source point for you. So you can see that there's a lighter area that's underneath that line right here, and then I go to a darker area as well. I'm going to grab a little bit of the dark area and run it across the whole light area here and just kind of work my way up and just sort of see how I'm going with this. So I'm just going to start down here and I'm just clicking and pulling up and clicking and pulling up. And then I'm going to do the opposite of that. I'm going to start at the top and click and pull down. And again, I'm getting a little frustrated about how long this is beginning to take me, so I'm going to bump my flow up closer to a 40-50% and start at the bottom again and kind of work my way up. And I'm feeling a little bit better about that part. That's working pretty good for me. I'm now going to go after the really deep shadow that's in the part that's down in here. The issue that I've got with this really deep shadow, though, is that it's got a lot of color in it already, and I don't want to be adding that to my mixer brush. So I'm going to go back to my J key, my healing brush tool. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. What I'm going to try to do is run the tool along here to force it to pull in the lighter colors from the top and the bottom both. That's what I'm going to actually try to do here. Again, we need to set a source point, so I'm just going to pick a place down, further down here on her stomach. Hold down the Option key and click to set that as a source. And then I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to click and drag across. Again, you're working on your low copy layer here. And then I'm going to click and go in the opposite direction here to do the same thing. And then I realize that that really dark crease that's in the middle has got to be high frequency. So I'm going to go back up to my high layer. I am then going to, again, it's a texture thing in here. If you hold down your Option key and take a look at it, hold down your Option key and just click on that eyeball, you can see where the problem is, and you can actually do this work just using your clone stamp tool with everything else turned off. So I am going to hit the S key to get my clone stamp tool. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to sample on the very top here to set my source at the top. I'm going to come down and drag across that top line to get rid of that, and then I'm going to come right down and do the exact same thing again over that lower line to get rid of that. Then I've got a white area that I can see in here as well that I want to go ahead and smooth out. So I'm just going to run that across there, and then I can also see I've still got a lot of that, I didn't replace that texture in the first line that I did across this, so I'm going to do it now. Make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to sample from a different spot. So I'm going to come down here to the bottom. Again, still using the clone stamp tool, and I'm simply going to run that across the top to get rid of that part. I've picked up a repeating pattern here. You can see it from doing those repeated clones to get rid of those top lines. I want to get rid of those, so I'm just going to grab some skin texture that's out here on the side of her stomach and come in here and paint across all of those guys to get rid of any sort of that sense of repeating pattern. Then I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball to turn everybody else back on. And this is sort of where I'm at right now. Again, if you turn your FS layers on and off, this is what they look like. And now it's relatively simple to go ahead and finish cleaning this out. I'm going to go to a regular brush. We're almost done here, guys, so if you need to go, go. But make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to sample lighter color here, so Option key to sample lighter color. Again, make sure that you're working on your low copy. I was still on my high copy, working on your low copy. My flow, I'm going to actually bump that up to a 10%, and then I'm just going to start painting in here. You see, that flow is way too fast. Command Z to undo that, drop that flow back down to like a 2 or 3%. Make sure that my brush is even softer still, and then just start to paint this area across. And then I've got, if I zip back out, I don't want to completely get rid of the shadow that's underneath here, because I think it makes sense to be there, but I want to mitigate it a little bit. I want to bring it down a little bit, so I'm going to make my brush considerably larger. I'm going to sample a darker color, not a highlight color here, but a darker color on her stomach right here. And again, I'm just going to start running across that to sort of lift that area, and a little bit in here. And I actually might even lift a little bit of the area down underneath her right there. Double click on the hand, and there you go. And turn your FS layer on and off. Wow, I've gotten more smiles going on right now than I've had any other time in this class. I thought there was other shit that would make you guys really happy, but this is it. Are there questions about this? Okay, that's it, guys. Let me take a quick look at the assignment, because I can't remember what it is for this coming week, but oh yeah, so here's the assignment really quickly, and you should pay attention to this part. If you read the assignment, it'll tell you what's really going on. There are 2 files in your assignment folder. If you open them both up into Photoshop, you don't need to open yours, I'll just show you mine, and then everybody can split. So there's an image right here. Your assignment is to knock this image out and put her on a white background, which you should already have done. That was your last assignment. If you didn't, you got to do it again. But then this image that's already on white are your retouching notes. So you need to pay attention to this. So in the retouching notes, you are to fill in this area of her hair that's actually opened up here. You are to clean up the eyebrows, get rid of the straggly little pieces of hair that are flying around. You see this dark, almost, it's a dark patch that's a little bit redder. You need to balance the skin tones and even all of this out, not only color, but tone as well. You need to fix the obvious pimples and stuff like that. Again, I'm only pointing, the notes only point at one. They're all over this, so you don't think, oh, I need to only fix that one pimple. That's not what this is about. She has contacts on. You need to remove the contacts. She's got pebbly skin underneath her eyes. You need to smooth that out. She's got shit in her nose that you need to get rid of. You need to get rid of the hair that's on her upper lip. You need to remove the laugh lines that are actually happening in here. There's hair on the other side. You need to add the missing tooth. And then you need to unbuck her teeth. So when it says fix teeth, that's what it means. She has got one tooth. Buck, that's such a shitty word to use. She has got one tooth that slightly overlaps the other one. You need to un-overlap it. And then any other notes that you have on here, pay attention to the notes. But that's the assignment for next week, and I'll see you guys then. Shoot.